There's a certain magic that lingers in the air of Egypt, a whisper of forgotten kings, lost cities, and secrets buried for millennia beneath the sand. We've all seen the iconic pyramids and the golden treasures of Tutankhamun, symbols of a civilization so advanced and sophisticated, it still captures our imagination today. But what if those celebrated wonders are only the surface of a far stranger, deeper story? What if the sands of Egypt conceal artifacts so baffling, so out of place in time, that they challenge everything we think we know about human history? These aren't just relics of a mighty empire. They are enigmas that defy logic, objects that simply should not exist. Think for a moment about the world of ancient Egypt, a society that flourished along the Nile over 5,000 years ago. In our textbooks, we picture pharaohs and priests, grand monuments built with copper tools and sheer human effort. But hidden among the familiar discoveries are finds that shatter this tidy image. We're talking about objects that hint at knowledge or technology far beyond their era precision, artifacts that rival modern engineering, depictions of devices that seem eerily advanced, even clues that suggest connections to cultures and continents that, by conventional timelines, should have been completely unknown. Each one raises profound questions. Were the ancient Egyptians in contact with other advanced societies? Did they inherit wisdom from a much older, lost civilization, or is our understanding of human innovation fundamentally incomplete? In this video, we're setting off on a journey to explore 25 of the most astonishing archaeological finds ever uncovered in Egypt, discoveries that stand in stark contrast to accepted history. We'll venture beyond the classic tales and into a realm of genuine mystery, where every artifact tells a story that doesn't quite fit. From mysterious stone vessels carved with impossible precision to hieroglyphs that seem to depict modern technology, from anomalous metals to puzzling anatomical knowledge, each entry on our list will invite you to look at ancient Egypt in a completely new light. This isn't just a catalog of curiosities, it's an exploration of the boundaries of our past, a chance to question what's possible and to wonder what else remains hidden, waiting to be found. So settle in, open your mind, and join us as we count down 25 archaeological finds in Egypt that, by all rights, should never have existed. And so we begin our journey into the unexplained with an artifact that has sparked fierce debate for decades, found not in a dusty tomb, but adorning the walls of the Temple of Hathor at Dendera. Carved into a sandstone block in a darkened crypt is a breathtakingly strange scene. At its center is a large, bulb-shaped object, almost like a giant pear, with a writhing snake, or perhaps a serpentine cord, coiled inside it. This cord connects to a box that a priestly figure is kneeling beside, while a towering, pillar-like form holds the entire bulbous object aloft. To many who look at it with modern eyes, the resemblance is uncanny and immediate. It looks for all the world like an ancient light bulb. This is the famous, or perhaps infamous, Dendera Light. The orthodox Egyptological explanation provides a beautifully symbolic, mythological interpretation. Scholars say this is not a depiction of technology, but of a profound spiritual concept. They identify the bulb as a lotus flower, a sacred symbol of creation and rebirth in ancient Egyptian belief. The snake inside is actually a snake, but it's a divine one, a depiction of the god Harsamtis, a manifestation of the sun god, being born from the primordial waters represented by the lotus. The entire tableau, in this view, illustrates the moment of cosmic creation, the emergence of light and life from the darkness, a story told through the language of myth and symbol. The box is seen as a jed pillar, a symbol of stability, and the figure is supporting this sacred, spiritual event. Yet, the alternative theory is compelling in its own right, precisely because of the carving's startlingly mechanical appearance. Proponents of the ancient technology view ask a simple but powerful question. Why does this spiritual symbol so closely resemble a sophisticated electrical apparatus? They suggest the bulb is a glass vacuum tube, identical in shape to early light bulbs like a Crookes tube. The snake is a filament, energized and glowing with an electrical current. The box is an insulator, and the pillar is the bulb's socket and support. The kneeling figure becomes an operator, and the entire scene is interpreted as a literal depiction of a functioning light source. This theory often points to the absence of soot in certain underground chambers, like the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, as potential evidence that the Egyptians had an alternative, soot-free form of illumination. To truly appreciate the comparison, one must visualize the side-by-side diagrams often presented by those who support this theory. When you place the Dendera carving next to an illustration of a Crookes tube, a late 19th century early electrical discharge tube, the parallels are undeniably striking. Both feature an elongated, sealed glass bulb. Both contain a central, serpentine filament that would carry a current. Both are supported by a base and connected to an external power source. The question this visual raises is perhaps the most tantalizing one of all. Is this merely an astonishing coincidence of symbolic art? Or could it be a rare, preserved glimpse of a technology so advanced that its loss sent history down a different path for 2,000 years? With no wires or batteries found alongside the carving, the mainstream view remains dominant, but the Dendera Light continues to shine brightly as a beacon of mystery, challenging us to question whether we have fully understood the capabilities of the civilization we study. Just as the Dendera carving challenges our understanding of ancient symbols, our next discovery presents a physical object that seems to defy its own time. While not found in Egypt itself, its implications ripple directly into the mysteries of the Nile, forcing us to reconsider what the ancient world might have been capable of. Unearthed in the 1930s in the region of Qujat Rabu, just outside modern-day Baghdad, this peculiar artifact dates back to the Parthian period, around 2 centuries before the Common Era. It consists of a rather simple-looking, 13-centimeter-tall clay jar, but it is the contents of this jar that have ignited decades of speculation. Inside, a carefully rolled copper cylinder was sealed in place with asphalt, and within this cylinder sat a single iron rod. The arrangement was deliberate, and the materials were specific. The copper and the iron, separated by an asphalt stopper, suspended inside an electrolyte solution, perhaps vinegar or wine, that the jar would have held. To any modern observer with a basic knowledge of chemistry, this configuration is unmistakable. It bears all the hallmarks of a simple galvanic cell, a basic battery. The theory that this was, in fact, a functioning ancient power source is compelling. When an acidic electrolyte fills the jar, a chemical reaction occurs between the dissimilar metals. The iron rod develops a positive charge, the copper cylinder a negative one, and if wires were connected, a small but measurable electric current would flow. What practical use could such a device have served? Proponents of the battery theory often point to the contemporary practice of electroplating, the process of using an electric current to deposit a thin layer of one metal, like gold, onto the surface of another. There are artifacts from the same period, particularly from Mesopotamia, that show objects plated with gold in a way that seems difficult to achieve with primitive fire gilding techniques alone. A handful of these batteries, connected in a series, could have provided enough voltage to accomplish this feat, suggesting a level of chemical knowledge we never attributed to these ancient cultures. This idea gains an even more fascinating dimension when we consider unconfirmed, and often controversial, reports of similar finds within Egypt itself. While no Egyptian battery has ever been officially documented and accepted by mainstream archaeology, some researchers have long speculated that the flawless, mirror-like gold plating found on some of Tutankhamun's most exquisite artifacts, or the precise silver coatings on certain objects, might hint at a lost electrochemical process. Without physical evidence, these claims remain in the realm of speculation, but the existence of the Baghdad Battery gives them a tantalizing, if unproven, plausibility. Of course, the mainstream archaeological perspective offers a much more mundane, and arguably more evidence-based, explanation. Many scholars argue that the object was simply a secure storage container for precious papyrus or parchment scrolls. The iron rod would have been the scroll's spindle, around which the valuable document was wound. The copper cylinder would have served as a protective case, and the asphalt seal would have kept the contents safe from moisture and decay. This interpretation aligns perfectly with known practices for storing important texts, and it requires no leap into speculative technology. The primary challenge to the battery theory is the lack of any associated wires or electrical components found with the jar. Furthermore, if these were common tools for plating, why have so few been discovered, and why are there no clear depictions of their use in any contemporary art or writing? The storage scroll explanation fits neatly into the established archaeological record, whereas the ancient battery requires us to rewrite a chapter of technological history. Yet, the sheer elegance of its design continues to captivate. The Baghdad Battery, regardless of its true purpose, stands as a powerful testament to the ingenuity of the ancient world. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable possibility that our ancestors' knowledge might have been far more sophisticated than we give them credit for, leaving us to wonder what other secrets, perhaps even within the sands of Egypt, have simply been misunderstood as mundane. But just when you thought the mysteries of ancient technology couldn't get any more compelling, we arrive at a set of carvings that have become a modern internet sensation, a puzzle etched in stone that seems to show the impossible. High on a ceiling beam within the Temple of Seti, the first at Abydos, a site renowned for its breathtaking reliefs, is a cluster of hieroglyphs that has launched 1,000 theories. To the casual observer, and certainly to the eager researcher scouring the internet, the images are unmistakable. One looks precisely like a modern helicopter, complete with a cockpit and what appears to be a rotating rotor blade. Right beside it, you can make out the distinct shapes of a submarine, a futuristic aircraft, and even something resembling a tank or a hovercraft. It's a stunning tableau, and it's easy to see why so many are convinced this is undeniable proof that the ancient Egyptians witnessed, or perhaps even possessed, advanced machinery. The explanation offered by mainstream Egyptology, however, is a fascinating lesson in archaeology and the practical realities of pharaonic politics. This phenomenon is known as a palimpsest, a term borrowed from manuscript studies where old writing was scraped off and parchment was reused. In this case, it wasn't parchment, but stone. The theory goes like this. The temple was originally commissioned by Seti I, a powerful pharaoh of the 19th dynasty. His artisans meticulously carved his royal cartouche, his formal name enclosed in an oval deep into the stone. After his death, his son, the great Ramesses II, came to the throne. In what may have been an act of political consolidation or simple reverence, Ramesses ordered that his own name be carved in the same prestigious location. The workers didn't quarry a new block, they simply plastered over his father's deep-cut cartouche and carved his own directly on top of the new plaster surface. Centuries later, this plaster filler crumbled away and fell out, leaving behind a ghostly, overlapping combination of both hieroglyphs. The helicopter isn't a single, intentional image, but a stunningly fortuitous accident, the overlapping curves of a ram's horn from one inscription, the body of a snake from another, and the leg of a bird from a third, all merging to create a form that our modern brains instantly recognize. Yet, for those who support the alternative theory, this official explanation feels like an overly convenient way to dismiss something truly extraordinary. They argue that the coincidence is simply too perfect. The resulting composite images don't just resemble modern vehicles, they are uncannily accurate. The helicopter has a tail boom and a main rotor. The submarine has a clear, streamlined hull and a conning tower. The other objects are equally evocative. Proponents suggest that if this were merely random overlap, we would expect to see mostly nonsensical, jumbled shapes, not a coherent cluster of images that so clearly match 20th century technology. This leads to a breathtaking possibility. What if these are not random overlaps at all, but a deliberate record? Could they be depictions of advanced vehicles from a lost civilization, perhaps from Atlantis or even an extraterrestrial visit, that the Egyptians sought to preserve? Maybe the original carvers under Seti I recorded something they had actually seen, and Ramesses Roman II, for reasons unknown, later attempted to erase this knowledge, only for time and decay to reveal the truth once more. The most powerful way to understand this debate is to see it for yourself. If you look at a clear, high-resolution photograph of the Abydos ceiling, you can, with a little effort, train your eye to see both realities. First, you can trace the individual, standard hieroglyphs that Egyptologists identify the snakes, the birds, the arms, and see how their superimposition creates the bizarre, machine-like shapes. It becomes a fascinating exercise in pattern recognition, showing how our brains are wired to find familiar forms in complex data. Then, shift your perspective and look at the complete, composite images. The helicopter suddenly appears, solid and undeniable. This side-by-side visual comparison is the core of the mystery. It presents two completely different narratives from the exact same set of lines in the stone. One is a story of practical archaeology, of plaster and politics, and the random hand of erosion. The other is a story that could rewrite history, suggesting that the pharaohs of Egypt might have known secrets that we have only recently rediscovered. The true answer lies hidden in the stone, and which story you believe may depend entirely on how you choose to look at it. Now, let's journey south, far from the temple walls covered in cryptic symbols, and into the raw, open-air landscape of an ancient quarry. Here, lying in state not as a finished monument, but as a colossal promise broken, is a find that speaks not through strange images, but through its sheer, overwhelming physical presence. In the granite quarries of Aswan, there rests the Unfinished Obelisk, a single piece of stone that, if completed, would have been the largest obelisk ever attempted by the ancient Egyptians. It remains today exactly as the workers left it, partially carved from the living bedrock, offering us an unparalleled, open-air museum of ancient engineering. But this isn't just a lesson in how they worked. It's a source of profound mystery about how they could have possibly achieved such a feat. To stand before it is to be humbled. This isn't an object you simply look at, it's a landscape you experience. The obelisk is staggering in its proportions. It measures nearly 42 meters, or 138 feet long. To put that in perspective, that's taller than a 10-story building, hewn from a single, flawless block of the hardest stone, red granite. Its intended weight is estimated at well over 1,100 tons. That's heavier than 200 full-grown African elephants. All around it, you can see the negative space where workers painstakingly carved deep trenches. Following the precise lines you can still see marked in red ochre on the stone's surface. And then, at a critical moment, the project came to a sudden halt. A massive crack appeared in the granite, a fatal flaw that rendered the monolith useless. It was abandoned, left to the sands, giving us a perfect snapshot of an ambitious project frozen in time. The conventional explanation for how they achieved this preliminary carving is both straightforward and astonishing in its own right. Egyptologists point to the thousands of dolerite pounding stones found scattered around the site. Dolerite is an even harder stone than granite. The accepted theory is that teams of workers would have swung these dolerite balls, not to chip away at the granite, but to literally pulverize it. They would have pounded the surface along the trench lines over and over, reducing the granite to a fine dust, which was then swept away. This process, repeated for millions of strokes, would have slowly, inexorably, deepened the trenches until the obelisk was freed from the bedrock. It's a method that demonstrates immense patience and a seemingly limitless labor force, a testament to the sheer willpower of the ancient Egyptian state. Yet, when you look at the precision of the trenches and the immensity of the task, this explanation begins to feel inadequate to some researchers. The logistics are mind-boggling. Using the pounding method, how many workers could have fit along the narrow trenches? How many swings per day could they manage in the blistering heat? The time and effort required to free a 1,000-ton obelisk this way seem almost superhuman. This has led to a compelling alternative theory. What if the ancient Egyptians possessed a lost technology for working stone? One of the most enduring speculative ideas is that they had discovered a method to temporarily soften granite, perhaps using a chemical compound derived from plants, making the rock pliable enough to be shaped or even molded. Proponents of this idea point to the seemingly fluid, almost scooped-out appearance of some granite artifacts and the uncanny precision of certain cuts that are difficult to achieve even with modern diamond-tipped tools. Another, even more exotic theory suggests the use of advanced sonic or vibrational technology. Could a specific resonant frequency have been used to shatter the crystalline structure of the granite along a precise line, allowing for clean separation with minimal effort? While there is no direct archaeological evidence for such devices, the sheer perfection of other granite works, like the sarcophagi in the Serapeum of Saqqara, keeps these speculations alive. The most telling evidence in this debate is often found not in the obelisk itself, but in the subtle details of the quarry floor. When you examine the trench walls closely, you can clearly see the tool marks. In some places, they are exactly what you would expect from the pounding stone method, a rough, pecked surface, but in other areas, the marks are different. There are long, continuous, and incredibly smooth grooves that run for meters along the granite. These grooves don't look like the result of random pounding. They look more like the mark of a single, sustained, and powerful cutting action. This visual contrast is jarring. Side by side, the rough, pecked areas tell a story of brute force and immense labor, a narrative we can easily understand. But the long, smooth grooves whisper a different story altogether, one of a technique we cannot easily explain, a method that appears far more advanced and efficient. Was the pounding method just for the final shaping, after a more advanced technology had done the heavy lifting? Or are we simply misinterpreting the evidence? The Unfinished Obelisk doesn't give up its secrets easily. It lies as a permanent question posed in stone, challenging us to solve a multimillion-stroke puzzle and wonder if the true methods of the ancient builders are still hiding in plain sight, waiting for us to understand what we are actually seeing. While the Unfinished Obelisk poses a monumental question about quarrying, our next discovery shifts the focus to a puzzle of microscopic precision, hidden deep within the most famous structure on Earth. In 1872, a British engineer named Wayneman Dixon was exploring the Great Pyramid of Giza, specifically the small, enigmatic shafts that branch off from the king's chamber. These narrow passages, often called air shafts, though their true purpose remains debated, were sealed at both ends. Driven by curiosity, Dixon and his colleague Dr. James Grant decided to investigate. They carefully chiseled a small opening in the southern shaft's limestone wall, and upon inserting a wire, felt an object. What they retrieved from the dark, confined space was a set of 3 small relics that would become known as the Dixon relics: a small, 2.5-centimeter bronze hook, a granite or basalt ball, and most importantly, a fragment of a length of cedar wood, perhaps part of a measuring rod. But it was the means of their retrieval that would later spawn an even deeper mystery, one that lay hidden for nearly a century. The story of the core sample itself truly begins decades later. While the hook and the ball were deposited in the British Museum, the piece of cedar wood was mislaid and presumed lost for almost 100 years. It was only in 1993 that it was miraculously rediscovered inside the archives of the museum. Yet, the most compelling part of this find wasn't the wooden fragment itself, but something that came with it. According to some accounts, a drilled core sample, a cylindrical piece of stone, was also recovered from one of these shafts. This core sample presented a feature so bizarre that it continues to defy conventional explanations. The core, made of hard granite or basalt, exhibited a single, continuous, spiraling groove cut into its surface with immaculate, machine-like precision. The groove was perfectly uniform in depth and pitch, wrapping around the core in a smooth, unbroken spiral. To understand why this is so shocking, we need to consider the official timeline of technology. The Great Pyramid is dated to the Old Kingdom, around 2,500 years before the Common Era. The hardest metal the Egyptians were known to have used for tools was copper, sometimes alloyed with a small amount of tin to create bronze. The idea of using a copper tube drill, even with the aid of a hard abrasive sand slurry, to cut into granite is plausible for creating a basic hole. The abrasive sand does the actual cutting as it's ground between the spinning copper and the hard stone. However, this method has significant limitations. The feed rate, the speed and pressure at which the drill advances into the stone, would have been incredibly slow. The resulting core would typically show a rough, irregular surface, with the abrasive particles creating a scratched, stippled effect as they were crushed and rolled randomly under the tool. The core sample from the Great Pyramid shows nothing of the sort. Instead, the groove is clean, sharp, and continuous, as if it was made by a drill bit that was not only incredibly hard but also advancing into the granite at a steady, rapid, and forceful rate. The signature it leaves behind suggests a tool that was removing material much more efficiently than a simple copper tube and sand ever could. This anomaly has led to some extraordinary theories. One of the most compelling is the suggestion of ultrasonic machining, an advanced manufacturing process that wasn't developed until the mid-20th century. In ultrasonic machining, or more accurately, ultrasonic abrasion, a tool shaped to the desired form is vibrated at extremely high frequencies thousands of times per second, while an abrasive slurry flows between the tool and the workpiece. This high-frequency vibration drives the abrasive particles into the material, allowing for the precise machining of very hard, brittle substances like granite, glass, or ceramic. The process can produce exceptionally smooth surfaces and clean, precise grooves. The spiral mark on the Dixon core, some argue, is a textbook example of the kind of feed mark that such an ultrasonic drill would leave behind as it advanced steadily into the stone. Proponents of this lost technology theory ask a simple, powerful question. How could the ancient Egyptians have achieved such a feat without access to the precise machinery and power sources we associate with this level of work? It implies a level of technical knowledge that completely rewrites our understanding of the past. The mainstream counterargument, of course, seeks a more conventional explanation. Some geologists and archaeologists suggest that the spiral groove might not be a tool mark at all, but a natural feature of the stone itself. Granite is an igneous rock, formed from cooled magma, and it can sometimes contain vein-like structures or inclusions of a different, slightly softer mineral. As the core was drilled, even with a simple copper tube and sand, this softer material could have been preferentially eroded, creating the illusion of a precision-cut spiral groove. Another possibility is that the groove is indeed a tool mark, but from a much later period. The Great Pyramid has been open and explored for centuries. Could this core sample have been drilled by a later civilization? Perhaps the Romans or even 19th century explorers like Dixon himself, using more advanced iron or steel tools, and then mistakenly associated with the original pyramid construction. The rediscovery of the artifact within the Dixon collection lends it credibility, but the chain of custody over a century is not perfectly clear. Ultimately, the mystery of the Dixon core sample rests on a direct visual and tactile comparison. Imagine holding two core samples in your hands. The first, drilled using a reconstructed ancient method with a copper tube and sand, feels rough to the touch. Under a magnifying glass, you see a chaotic landscape of tiny fractures and scratches, the result of the abrasive sand being crushed erratically. The second sample is the one from the pyramid. Its surface is remarkably smooth, and running along its length is that single, perfect, spiraling groove, as crisp and defined as if it were made yesterday by a machine tool. The difference between the two is not a matter of degree. It feels like a difference in kind. This single artifact, small enough to hold in your palm, carries a weight of implication that rivals the pyramid itself. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable possibility, that the builders of the Great Pyramid might have commanded a technology so refined that we are only now beginning to comprehend its parameters. A technology that left its cryptic signature deep within the heart of their greatest achievement. Leaving behind the microscopic precision of the Dixon core, we now descend into one of the most overwhelming and tangible displays of ancient skill ever discovered, the Serapeum of Saqqara. Located deep beneath the desert sands, this vast subterranean complex is a catacomb designed as the eternal resting place for the sacred Apis bulls, creatures venerated as living incarnations of the god Ptah. Discovered in 1851 by the French archaeologist Auguste Mariette, the main gallery is an awe-inspiring sight, a long, straight tunnel lined with enormous, single-chambered niches. And within each niche rests a single object that defies simple explanation, a colossal box, or sarcophagus, carved from a single block of incredibly hard stone. There are 24 of these sarcophagi in total, each one a testament to a level of craftsmanship that continues to baffle engineers and archaeologists to this day. The sheer scale of these boxes is the first thing that strikes you. They are monumental. Each sarcophagus is carved from a single block of either rose granite or even harder diorite, and they are phenomenally heavy. with estimates for the largest ones ranging between 70 and 100 tons. To put that in perspective, we're talking about the weight of a fully loaded commercial truck, meticulously shaped from one of the most difficult stones on Earth to work. But it's not their size that is the real mystery, it's the stupefying precision with which they were made. The surfaces of these boxes are not merely flat, they are flawlessly, impossibly flat. When you place a precision straightedge along the surface of one of these 100-ton lids, or along the walls of the box itself, there is no light visible beneath the edge. The flatness is consistent across the entire expanse, a feat that requires an understanding of geometry and control that rivals modern machining tolerances. Furthermore, the corners are perfect right angles, with an accuracy measured in fractions of a millimeter. The inside surfaces are as smooth and precise as the outside, meaning the craftsman achieved this perfection not just on one face, but on all 6 interior sides of a hollowed-out block. Perhaps the most telling clues are the tool marks that remain. On the surface of several sarcophagi, and notably on the insides of the granite boxes, you can find what appear to be the signatures of a specific, advanced technique, bore holes. These are not rough, punched holes. They are clean, circular depressions that look as though they were made by a massive, tubular drill bit. The spiraling grooves within these holes, much like the one on the Dixon core, suggest a drill that was not only incredibly hard, but also fed into the stone with tremendous, consistent force, chewing through the granite with an efficiency that copper tools simply cannot replicate. The orthodox explanation for the Serapeum is clear and rooted in accepted history. Egyptologists tell us that these were indeed crafted for the Apis bulls, with the earliest examples dating from the reign of Ramesses II and continuing for over 1,000 years. The level of workmanship is attributed to the immense religious significance of the Apis cult. No effort was too great, and no amount of time or labor was too expensive to honor the divine. The method proposed is one of extreme patience, using stone hammers, dullite pounding stones, and sand as an abrasive, shaped and polished over countless man-hours. In this view, the bore holes are evidence of tube drilling with copper implements and abrasive sand, a slow but ultimately effective process if you have a limitless supply of dedicated workers and time. However, this conventional explanation faces a formidable challenge when confronted with the physical evidence. The argument against the established timeline hinges on a simple but powerful question of necessity and capability. Why would a civilization, even one with deep religious conviction, apply a level of precision to a stone box that would be buried forever and never seen again, a level of precision that serves no discernible practical or aesthetic purpose? The boxes were sealed in darkness. The perfect flatness and the flawless 90-degree angles are functional marvels, the kind of thing you do when you need 2 surfaces to mate perfectly for a technical reason, like containing pressure or creating a seal, not for a religious interment. This has led a growing number of researchers to propose a far more radical theory. What if the Serapeum Sarcophagi are not the work of the dynastic Egyptians at all, but are actually relics of a much older, pre-dynastic, and highly advanced civilization? In this speculative scenario, the pharaohs of the New Kingdom stumbled upon these indestructible, perfectly crafted boxes, much as we have. Recognizing them as objects of immense power and mystery, they ascribed them a divine purpose and incorporated them into their own religious practices, dedicating them to the Apis bull. The boxes were simply too perfect, too well made to have been ignored. This would explain the anachronistic nature of their construction. They appear too advanced for the known toolkits of the time. It would also account for why the later boxes in the Serapeum, those definitively carved by the dynastic Egyptians, are noticeably cruder in their workmanship. They were attempts to replicate the masterpieces they had found, but with inferior technology. The true builders, according to this theory, remain unknown, a lost culture with a machining technology that we would struggle to replicate even today. A civilization whose legacy lies buried in a silent, underground gallery, waiting for us to fully comprehend the magnitude of what they left behind. Shifting from the tangible, physical mysteries of stone and metal, we now encounter a discovery that exists purely in the realm of text and testimony, a story written on papyrus that, if authentic, would fundamentally alter our view of the ancient Egyptian sky. This is the enigmatic and hotly debated Tully Papyrus. Unlike the artifacts we've explored, this is not an object you can visit in a museum. Its very existence is a matter of historical dispute. The story begins in the 1930s, when Alberto Tully, the director of the Egyptian section of the Vatican Museum, allegedly came across a unique papyrus in an antique shop in Cairo. According to the account, the price was too high for him to purchase the original, so he instead made a copy of the text, replacing the original hieratic script with hieroglyphs. This transcript then found its way to a researcher named Boris de Rashwilds, who published his translation in the 1950s, and from that moment, a firestorm of controversy was born. The translated text describes an event purported to have occurred during the reign of Thutmose Roman III, around the year 1480 before the Common Era. It tells of a bizarre celestial phenomenon. The scribes of the royal house were going about their duties when they witnessed circles of fire appearing in the southern sky. The description is startlingly vivid. These objects were brighter than the sun, and they are said to have changed direction, moving through the sky in a formation that defied the natural movement of stars or comets. After several days of these appearances, the text claims the objects ascended higher and headed south, leaving behind a lingering, fishy or resinous odor, and a mysterious substance that was subsequently cleared away by the pharaoh's orders. The entire court, including the pharaoh himself, supposedly witnessed this event, which was then recorded for posterity. To any modern reader, the account is unmistakably evocative of a mass unidentified flying object sighting, a fleet of brilliant, maneuverable craft observed by the highest authority in the land. The case for the Tully Papyrus as a genuine ancient record rests on several compelling points. Firstly, the narrative style and the specific details align with known Egyptian practices for recording unusual or omen-filled events. The involvement of the royal scribes and the pharaoh lends it an air of official credibility. Proponents argue that the description is too specific and too anomalous to be a simple misinterpretation of a meteor shower or a planetary conjunction. The mention of the objects changing direction and moving in formation, the strange odor, and the residual substance all point towards a physical, technological phenomenon, not an astronomical one. For those who believe in the ancient astronaut theory or the possibility of prehistoric extraterrestrial contact, the Tully Papyrus is a stunning piece of corroborating evidence, suggesting that the advanced beings they theorize about were not only present, but were witnessed and documented by one of the most powerful civilizations of the ancient world. However, the case against its authenticity is, from a scholarly perspective, even more powerful, and it begins with the papyrus itself, or rather, the lack thereof. The original papyrus has never been found. There is no record of it in the Vatican's own inventories, and Alberto Tully's own notes on the matter are vague and unverifiable. All we have is a modern copy of a copy, a document with no provenance that can be examined or carbon dated. This alone is enough for most Egyptologists to dismiss it entirely as a hoax. The translation itself is also a major point of contention. Critics have meticulously analyzed the hieroglyphic transcript and found numerous grammatical and syntactical errors that are inconsistent with the language of the 18th dynasty. The phrasing and word choices appear to be a clumsy, modern construction, someone's attempt to mimic ancient Egyptian that doesn't quite hold up under expert scrutiny. The dramatic details, like the fishy odor, are seen as theatrical flourishes designed to make the story more convincing to a 20th century audience familiar with UFO lore. The most likely explanation, and the one accepted by mainstream academia, is that the Tully Papyrus is a clever and enduring forgery, likely created in the early 20th century when public fascination with Egyptology and a growing interest in the paranormal created a ripe market for such sensational stories. The timing is critical. The initial discovery and subsequent translation emerged right in the middle of the flying saucer craze of the 1940s and 50s. It fits the pattern of other archaeological hoaxes, where a tantalizing narrative is presented just as the public consciousness becomes primed to accept it. The story's appeal is undeniable, offering a direct connection between the majesty of ancient Egypt and the modern mystery of UFOs. But without a physical artifact to study, it remains in the realm of legend, not history. This leaves us with a profound and lingering question, one that goes to the heart of historical evidence. The Tully Papyrus, if genuine, describes an object, or a fleet of objects that, by our standard historical understanding, absolutely should not have been in the Egyptian sky. Its existence in the record would force us to confront the possibility of technology that has no place in the 15th century before the Common Era. Yet, without the original document, we are left with a classic conundrum. Does the absence of evidence definitively prove the evidence is a forgery? Or does it simply mean a truly world-changing artifact has been lost to time? The story of the Tully Papyrus serves as a powerful cautionary tale about the desire to find modern mysteries in ancient texts, and a reminder that sometimes the most compelling stories are those that forever linger just beyond the edge of proof. But after considering the possibility of objects in the sky, we return our gaze firmly to the ground, to an artifact that is both physically small and conceptually enormous. Discovered in a tomb at the northern edge of the Saqqara necropolis, the final resting place of a First Dynasty prince named Sabu, who lived around 3,000 years before the Common Era, lies an object that seems to have fallen out of time. When the esteemed Egyptologist Walter Bryan Emery unearthed it in 1936, he must have been utterly baffled. It was not a typical funerary offering of pottery or jewelry. Instead, it was a delicate, disc-shaped object carved from a very fragile and brittle stone called schist. At first glance, its form is strikingly modern. The disc is about 61 centimeters, or roughly 2 feet in diameter, and its design is breathtakingly complex. It features a central hub, from which 3 beautifully sculpted, curved lobes or petals sweep outward to form a perfect, symmetrical trilateral shape. The lobes are so finely crafted, with such subtle, flowing curves, that the overall appearance is uncannily similar to a modern steering wheel, or perhaps the flywheel of a sophisticated machine. The entire object is thin almost dangerously so, and the craftsmanship is so precise that it seems to defy the material from which it was made. Schist is a metamorphic rock that is notoriously flaky and brittle. It is not a material that lends itself to being carved into delicate, thin-walled shapes with complex curves without shattering. Creating this object would have required a level of stone working skill that is almost unimaginable for a period considered to be at the very dawn of Egyptian civilization. The official explanation provided by Egyptology attempts to place this bizarre object into a familiar, ceremonial context. It is catalogued as a ritualistic vessel stand, perhaps used to support an ornamental bowl or vase during important ceremonies. In this interpretation, the central hub would have cradled the base of a container, and the 3 elegant lobes are simply a decorative, artistic choice, possibly symbolizing a lotus flower or another natural form sacred to the early Egyptians. This classification makes a certain logical sense. We know the ancients created many ornate stands and vessels for their religious practices. However, this ceremonial purpose feels deeply at odds with the staggering technical achievement the disc represents. The argument against the simple, vase stand theory hinges on the immense, and seemingly unnecessary, difficulty of its creation. To produce the schist disk's flawless, symmetrical curves from such a brittle material would have required a technique far beyond simple chiseling. Many engineers and alternative researchers argue that the disk shows clear signs of having been turned on a lathe. The consistency of the curves, the perfect symmetry around the central axis, and the absence of the kind of irregular tool marks left by hand carving all point towards a rotary fabrication method. This presents a monumental problem for conventional history. The lathe, as a machine tool, does not appear in the historical record until over 2,500 years later, in ancient Rome. The idea that a civilization using stone tools and copper chisels could have developed a machine capable of such precise, rotational machining is a proposition that turns our understanding of technological progress on its head. This leads to the compelling, if speculative, alternative that the schist disk is a functional component from a much more advanced apparatus. Its resemblance to a flywheel is particularly suggestive. In modern machinery, a flywheel is used to store rotational energy, smoothing out the delivery of power from a motor to a machine. The 3 curved lobes of the disk could have served as vanes or impellers, designed to move air or liquid. Could it have been part of a centrifugal pump, or even a component in a larger, unknown energy system? The sheer complexity of the design implies a functional purpose, a form that follows a specific engineering need, not merely an artistic whim. Why would an artist or a priest go through the Herculean effort of machining a ceremonial stand from a stone that could shatter at any moment, when a much easier to carve wood or pottery would have served the same symbolic purpose just as well, if not better? The core of this mystery is best understood by holding the two competing ideas in your mind at once. On one hand, picture the Schist Disk as a vase stand. It is a beautiful, albeit perilously fragile, piece of ritual art, an example of early dynastic Egyptians pushing the boundaries of their craft for a divine purpose. On the other hand, visualize it as a machine part. Suddenly, its form makes a different kind of sense. The curves, the hub, the symmetry all align with principles of mechanical engineering. This second image, however, opens a door to a far more radical history, one where the timeline of invention is not a straight line but a circle, or perhaps a line with a forgotten, much earlier beginning. The Schist Disk of Prince Sabu remains one of the most tangible and disquieting anomalies, a stone puzzle that whispers of skills lost to time, challenging us to decide whether we are looking at a masterpiece of art or a fossilized piece of a technology that should not have existed for thousands of years. Just when you think the Serapeum has revealed all its secrets of precision, another layer of the mystery emerges, one that deals not with the finesse of the craft, but with the raw, overwhelming physics of moving these behemoths. We've marveled at the flawless surfaces and perfect angles of the sarcophagi, but that leads to an even more pressing question. How did these 70 to 100-ton monoliths even get into this underground labyrinth in the first place? The challenge of their creation is matched only by the puzzle of their delivery. To appreciate this, you have to mentally walk the path they would have taken. First, imagine the quarry, likely in Aswan, hundreds of miles to the south. A single 100-ton block of red granite is freed from the bedrock. The task now is to transport it, not across open ground, but down into a meticulously carved subterranean tunnel system. The main gallery of the Serapeum is a long, straight corridor, but it is not a grand, cavernous hole. It is narrow, with just enough clearance on either side of the massive boxes for a person to squeeze by. There are sharp turns and descents leading into this gallery, creating a logistical nightmare. The conventional theory, which relies on what we know the Egyptians did have, paints a picture of Herculean effort. It proposes a system of massive wooden sledges, ropes made from papyrus fibers, and armies of laborers. The granite box would have been loaded onto a sledge, and this sledge would have been pulled along a track, perhaps lubricated with water or mud to reduce friction. To navigate the tight corners and the downward slope into the tunnels, workers would have used levers and rollers, inch by painstaking inch, to pivot the colossal weight. Teams of hundreds, possibly even thousands of men would have coordinated their pulls, directed by overseers, their chants and groans echoing through the confined spaces as they maneuvered a weight equivalent to a space shuttle's solid rocket booster through a corridor barely wider than a modern subway tunnel. It's a scenario that demonstrates incredible organization and a staggering command of human labor, a testament to the power of the pharaonic state to mobilize its population for a divine cause. Yet, when you subject this scenario to practical engineering analysis, the problems multiply rapidly. The first is the issue of the sledges themselves. Wood strong enough to support 100 tons without splintering would have needed to be immensely thick and robust, likely constructed from massive timbers. But where did the Egyptians source such enormous quantities of strong timber? Egypt was not a land of vast forests. Large wood like cedar had to be imported from Lebanon at great expense. Then there is the rope. While papyrus rope is strong, the physics of pulling such a load is unforgiving. The force required to overcome static friction and get a 100-ton block moving on a sledge, even on a lubricated surface, is astronomical. The ropes, no matter how thick, would have been under immense strain, with a terrifying risk of snapping under the tension, potentially with catastrophic consequences for the workers in the confined tunnel. The narrowness of the passages also severely limits the number of people, who can effectively pull on the ropes at any one time, making the already difficult task almost superhuman. This immense logistical struggle raises a profound and recurring question. Why? Why go to such extravagant, almost inhuman lengths for the burial of an animal? The Epes bull was sacred, yes, a revered incarnation of the god Ptah. The Egyptians dedicated vast resources to their gods, but the scale of the effort here seems to transcend reverence and enter the realm of the obsessive. The boxes were sealed in total darkness, never to be seen again. The perfect machined surfaces served no visible purpose once the lid was closed. So why apply a level of precision and undertake a transportation feat that would be a monumental challenge even with 21st century machinery? All for a purpose that, on the surface, seems to demand only a fraction of that effort. This disconnect between the means and the end is what fuels the alternative theory of a much older, repurposed site. Perhaps the most compelling alternative explanation is that the pharaohs of the New Kingdom did not build the Serapeum's finest boxes from scratch. Instead, this theory suggests they discovered them. Imagine a New Kingdom pharaoh, like Ramesses II, exploring the ancient, forgotten ruins at Saqqara. His workers uncover a pre-existing, impossibly ancient underground complex. Inside, they find these indestructible, perfectly crafted stone boxes, made with a technology far beyond their own. What would they have thought? They would have seen them as divine artifacts, objects of immense power left by the gods or the legendary followers of Horus from a primordial age. It would have been a natural and powerful religious act to consecrate these mysterious, godlike containers to their most sacred animal, the Epes bull. In this scenario, the Herculean effort of the dynastic Egyptians was not the creation and transport of the boxes, but their rediscovery and rededication. They may have moved some of the boxes short distances to arrange them in the gallery, accounting for the cruder tool marks we see on the later, less perfect sarcophagi, their own attempts to replicate the masterpieces they found. This would elegantly explain the anachronistic technology, the inexplicable transportation feat, and the overwhelming effort for an animal burial. They were simply making use of a pre-existing, sacred infrastructure whose original, and perhaps far more significant, purpose had been lost to the sands of time. Continuing our descent into Egypt's deepest mysteries, we now arrive at a site that feels less like a temple and more like a portal to another age entirely. Located directly behind the magnificent temple of Seti, the first at Abydos, a place already famous for its cryptic hieroglyphs, lies a structure that seems to defy the very architectural language of the civilization that supposedly built it. This is the Assyrian, a sunken, megalithic complex that exudes an aura of profound and impenetrable antiquity. The first thing that strikes any visitor is the sheer, raw power of its construction. Unlike the refined, beautifully decorated halls of Seti's temple, the Assyrian is built from colossal blocks of red sandstone, each one a monster of stone weighing many tons. These are not the carefully fitted, smaller blocks of New Kingdom architecture. These are Cyclopean stones, massive, stark, and minimalist, assembled with a brutalist aesthetic that feels alien amidst the elegance of its surroundings. The central feature of the Assyrian is its unique, island-like configuration. The entire structure was designed to be perpetually filled with water, creating a symbolic representation of the primordial mound emerging from the waters of creation, a concept central to the worship of Osiris, the god of the afterlife and resurrection for whom the site is named. A central hall, flanked by 10 of these enormous stone piers, contains a sarcophagus-like slab, with water channels ensuring the area was always submerged. This intentional, constant inundation is a key part of its mystery, because water is not just a symbolic element here. It is a destructive force. For a civilization known for its meticulous preservation of art and hieroglyphs, building a temple destined to be forever flooded seems counterintuitive, unless its origins belong to a time when the water table was much lower, a period stretching back thousands of years before the pharaohs of the New Kingdom. The official attribution places the Assyrians' construction during the reign of Seti I, around 1300 years before the Common Era, and it is considered a cenotaph, a symbolic tomb for the god Osiris. Egyptologists point to its thematic connection to the larger temple complex and argue that its stark style was a deliberate archaism, a conscious attempt by Seti's architects to mimic a much older, more primordial style to honor an ancient god. In this view, the builders were looking backward, trying to capture the essence of a bygone era for religious and symbolic reasons. They chose massive stones and a minimalist design not because they had to, but because it evoked the desired feeling of timeless, primeval power. Yet, a closer examination of the stonework makes this official story difficult to swallow for many. The argument for a far older origin is rooted in a direct, physical comparison with unquestioned New Kingdom work. Just a few dozen meters away, the Temple of Seti, the first, stands as a masterpiece of its time. Its walls are covered in some of the most exquisite, deeply incised, and perfectly preserved relief carvings in all of Egypt. The blocks used are relatively small and manageable, fitted together with precision, but on a human scale. Now, walk into the Assyrian. The contrast could not be more jarring. The stones here are gargantuan, some weighing over 100 tons. The construction technique is completely different. The corners are not the precise, interlocking joints of the main temple, but often simple, massive blocks placed atop one another. The tool marks, where they exist, suggest a different method altogether, one focused on raw strength rather than refined artistry. It is the difference between a finely crafted piece of furniture and a dry stone wall built by giants. This has led to the compelling theory that the Assyrian is not a New Kingdom creation at all, but a pre-dynastic relic, a structure that was already ancient and partially buried when Seti I decided to build his temple directly in front of it. Proponents of this viewpoint to the water erosion on the stone. For the Assyrian to be perpetually flooded, it had to be built at a time when the local water table was significantly lower. Otherwise, the builders would have been constructing it at the bottom of a well. Geological evidence suggests the water table in the area has fluctuated dramatically over millennia, and the level required for the Assyrians' design to make practical sense corresponds to a period much older than the New Kingdom, possibly even predating the First Dynasty. Furthermore, the architectural style finds its closest parallels not in any known pharaonic structure, but in the enigmatic megalithic sites like the Valley Temple at Giza, another Cyclopean construction that many researchers also suspect has roots in a lost epoch. The Assyrian stands as a profound architectural anomaly, a structure that feels out of place and out of time, silently challenging the official timeline and suggesting that the sands of Abydos may conceal a history far older and more mysterious than the tales of the pharaohs themselves. But if the Assyrian hints at a forgotten age of megalithic construction, our next subject takes that idea of a lost technological civilization and pushes it to its most daring and comprehensive extreme. We return now to the most iconic structure on the planet, the Great Pyramid of Giza, but we are about to view it through a lens that is as electrifying as it is controversial. The traditional narrative, taught for generations, is that it was a grandiose tomb for the pharaoh Khufu. Yet, a nagging problem has haunted this theory for centuries. Not a single piece of evidence, no mummy, no burial goods, no hieroglyphic inscriptions identifying it as a tomb has ever been found within its vast, echoing chambers. This profound absence has been the catalyst for countless alternative theories, but few are as meticulously engineered or as startlingly specific as the one proposed by master craftsman and engineer Christopher Dunn. In his groundbreaking book, The Giza Power Plant, Dunn presents a radical hypothesis. The Great Pyramid was not a tomb at all, but a colossal, sophisticated machine designed to generate and wirelessly transmit clean, harmonic energy. To understand this theory, you must first set aside the image of a silent, static monument and instead envision the pyramid as a dynamic, humming piece of precision machinery. Dunn argues that the entire structure was a giant acoustic resonator, tuned to the natural vibrational frequency of the Earth itself. The key to this system, he proposes, lies in the specific properties of the materials used and the exacting geometry of the interior chambers. Let's walk through his proposed energy generation process step by step. It begins with the subterranean chamber, a rough-hewn cavity dug deep into the bedrock beneath the pyramid. Dunn suggests this chamber was not unfinished, but rather functioned as a shock absorber, isolating the entire structure from the random seismic vibrations of the plateau, allowing it to resonate with only the pure, fundamental frequency of the planet. From there, the energy would be channeled upward. The Grand Gallery, with its spectacular corbelled walls, is reimagined not as a ceremonial passageway, but as a sound amplifier and collection funnel. Its precise, sloping design and complex resonant properties would have gathered the vibrational energy from the pyramid's core and focused it, like a laser beam of sound, into the uppermost chamber, the so-called King's Chamber. This chamber is the heart of Dun's power plant. It is constructed entirely from massive blocks of red granite, a stone rich in quartz crystals. Quartz is piezoelectric, meaning it generates an electrical charge when subjected to mechanical stress or vibration. Dun proposes that the entire chamber was designed to be flooded with powerful, resonant sound waves. As these sonic vibrations compressed the quartz crystals within the granite walls, floor, and ceiling, they would have caused the stone itself to generate a high-frequency electrical charge essentially. The entire room would have become electrified. But how was this sound created? Dun points to the enigmatic granite coffer in the King's Chamber. Mainstream archaeology calls it a sarcophagus, but it is conspicuously too large to have been brought in through the narrow passageways, meaning it was placed there during the pyramid's construction. Dun argues this box was not for a body, but was a vital component of the machine, a Helmholtz resonator, a device designed to produce a specific acoustic frequency. He suggests it was connected to a system that included the mysterious, narrow shafts that lead from both the King's and Queen's chambers. While often called air shafts, their exact purpose is unknown. In Dun's model, the southern shaft from the Queen's chamber may have been used to introduce a chemical fuel, perhaps a hydrogen-based compound, which would mix with a catalyst like zinc in the chamber, creating a controlled chemical reaction. The vibrations from this reaction would be amplified by the Grand Gallery, driving the acoustic oscillations in the King's chamber. The northern shafts, then, were not for the King's spirit to ascend, but were waveguides, tuned channels designed to transmit the resulting microwave energy out of the pyramid and into the atmosphere, where it could be harvested by distant, smaller resonators for practical use. The implications of this theory are, of course, staggering. If Dun is correct, then the ancient Egyptians, or the civilization that built the pyramid, possessed a knowledge of physics, acoustics, and electrical engineering that would not be rediscovered until the 19th and 20th centuries. It explains the otherwise baffling precision of the pyramid's construction, the perfectly level base, the precise alignment to true north, the seamless joints between multi-ton blocks, as necessities for a functioning machine, not mere artistic flourishes for a tomb. The absence of soot from torches inside makes sense if the interior was illuminated by another means, such as the wireless transmission of power. This is not merely an alternative history. It is a complete paradigm shift, suggesting that clean, resonant energy technology is not a modern innovation, but a lost art from a prehistoric golden age. Unsurprisingly, the mainstream archaeological community dismisses the Giza power plant theory. The primary criticism is the utter lack of any physical evidence for the proposed machinery. No wires, no generators, no controls, no remnants of the chemical fuels or receivers. Critics argue that Dun has engaged in a form of technological pareidolia, seeing complex modern machinery in what is, at its core, an elegant but fundamentally spiritual structure. They maintain that the pyramid's symbolic purpose as a resurrection machine for the pharaoh's soul, a vehicle for his ascension to the stars, is a sufficient explanation for its form and grandeur. The absence of a mummy is explained by the well-documented history of tomb robbery in antiquity. Yet, the power of Dun's theory lies in its elegant synthesis of the pyramid's most perplexing physical anomalies. It takes the inexplicable precision, the anomalous tool marks like those on the Dixon core, the curious material choices, and the mysterious, non-funerary chambers, and weaves them into a single, coherent, functional narrative. It asks us to look at the Great Pyramid not as a silent, dead relic, but as the fossilized skeleton of a machine, a powerhouse whose silent hum faded millennia ago, leaving behind only the immense and perfect bones of its structure. Whether you see it as brilliant engineering speculation or science fiction, the Giza power plant theory forces a fundamental question. Are we looking at the pinnacle of Bronze Age tomb building, or are we standing in the presence of the world's oldest and most advanced power station? A technology so radically out of place that we are only now, in the 21st century, beginning to grasp principles upon which it might have operated. Yet for all the grand theories surrounding monumental structures like the Great Pyramid, sometimes the most profound mysteries are not found in massive chambers, but in the quiet, accumulated treasures of a king's burial goods. To witness this firsthand, we must travel to Saqqara once more, but this time to one of the very oldest stone structures in all of Egypt, the step pyramid of Pharaoh Djoser from the 3rd dynasty, built around 2,650 years before the Common Era. Beneath this ancient, layered monument, archaeologists made a discovery that is less about scale and more about sublime, inexplicable perfection. Hidden in dark, subterranean galleries were not just a few precious artifacts, but a veritable hoard, tens of thousands of stone vases, bowls, and platters. At first, this might sound like a typical find, a pharaoh's wealth in grave goods. But when you look closely at these objects, the ordinary explanation completely falls apart. We are not looking at simple, hand-carved pottery. These vases were crafted from some of the hardest stones on Earth: diorite, basalt, granite, and the incredibly brittle schist. And they were shaped with a level of skill that seems to belong to a different epoch entirely. The first thing that strikes you about these vases is their breathtaking symmetry. They are not merely round, they are perfectly, flawlessly symmetrical. Many have long, elegant necks that flare out into wide, open bowls, or feature delicate, undercut lips that seem to defy the solid stone from which they are made. The walls are astonishingly thin and perfectly uniform in thickness from top to bottom. When you hold one, the balance is so precise it feels as though it was calculated by a machine. But perhaps the most telling clue of all is what you don't see. There are no tool marks. On a piece of hand-worked stone, even a masterfully finished one, you can usually find the subtle scars of its creation: tiny chips from a pounding stone, the rough striations from sanding, or the uneven grooves from a copper chisel. On the vases of Djoser, these marks are almost entirely absent. The surfaces are glassy smooth, with a consistent, polished finish that covers both the intricate exterior and the hard-to-reach interior. This flawless consistency, inside and out, is the hallmark of a specific manufacturing process. They appear to have been turned on a lathe. This presents a historical problem of monumental proportions. The Orthodox timeline places these vases in the early dynastic period, a time when Egypt was only just emerging as a unified state. The tools available were, by all accounts, primitive: stone hammers, copper chisels, and drills using sand as an abrasive. The idea that artisans of this era could have produced these vases using these simple tools strains credibility to the breaking point. To understand why, try a simple thought experiment. Imagine attempting to hollow out a long-necked vase from a block of granite using only a copper tube and sand. You would have no way to see inside the narrow neck to monitor your progress. The copper tube, being soft, would wear away faster than the granite, requiring constant replacement. The abrasive sand would act unpredictably in such a confined space, almost certainly causing the drill to wobble and creating an irregular, off-center cavity. The result would be a crude, lopsided vessel with uneven walls, not the exquisitely balanced, paper-thin masterpiece we find in Djoser's tomb. The contrast between the proposed method and the actual result is simply too great to ignore. This has led researchers and engineers to propose a far more radical explanation. The ancient Egyptians, or a predecessor civilization, possessed a sophisticated, mechanical rotary machine. The evidence for this is written in the stone itself. Many of the vases show a distinct, centralized depression in their base, a tiny, precise dimple that is the classic signature of a lathe's live center, the point where the workpiece is supported and rotated. Furthermore, the symmetry is so exact that it suggests the object was spinning around a fixed axis at high speed, while a fixed cutting tool was applied to it. This is not a technology we see depicted in any tomb painting or described in any hieroglyphic text. It is a ghost technology, inferred only from the perfection of the artifacts it left behind. The implications are staggering. It means that the knowledge of precision machining, of advanced rotational mechanics, existed at the very dawn of what we call civilization. This wasn't a slow evolution from crude stone bowls to refined ones. It was, apparently, a fully developed science from the very start. The mainstream archaeological perspective, while acknowledging the incredible craftsmanship, places these vases firmly within the context of Djoser's reign and his brilliant architect, Imhotep. In this view, the vases represent the pinnacle of what was possible with unlimited resources, patience, and religious devotion. The absence of tool marks is explained by countless hours of polishing with ever finer abrasives, a process that could indeed erase all traces of the initial shaping. The symmetry is attributed to the consummate skill of master artisans who used bow-driven drills and a great deal of practiced, manual dexterity. This explanation asks us to believe in a level of hand craftsmanship that has never been replicated since, even with our modern tools, all achieved at the very beginning of Egypt's long history. Yet, the most haunting question remains: why? Why would a culture apply such impossible, machine-like precision to tens of thousands of ritual objects destined to be sealed in darkness for eternity? The sheer volume of the find is as mysterious as the quality. We are not talking about one or two unique masterpieces. We are talking about an industrial-scale output of perfection. This scale and consistency point toward a standardized manufacturing process, not the variable results of individual artisans. It suggests a workshop with established, repeatable techniques, the kind of techniques that a machine like a lathe provides. The vases of Djoser's step pyramid stand as a silent, collective testament to a mystery that has been buried in plain sight. They are not grand, towering monoliths, but small, intimate objects that you could hold in your hand. And in that intimacy lies their power. They force us to confront the possibility that the hands that made them were guided by a knowledge we are only now beginning to recognize, a whisper of advanced technology from the shadowy dawn of human history. But even as we examine the precision of these vases, we encounter a monument so vast and weathered that its origins seem to stretch back into a completely different world. Rising from the Giza Plateau, the Great Sphinx is one of the most recognizable icons on the planet, a colossal fusion of a human head and a lion's body gazing eternally toward the east. For generations, mainstream Egyptology has dated its construction to the reign of the pharaoh Khafre, builder of the second pyramid at Giza, around 2,500 years before the Common Era. This attribution seems logical, fitting the Sphinx neatly into the grand building program of the Fourth Dynasty. Yet a simple, powerful observation first made by a scholar of a completely different discipline has thrown this comfortable timeline into a state of profound uncertainty, suggesting the Sphinx might be a sentinel from a time so ancient it defies our written history. The challenge to the orthodox view was ignited not by an archaeologist, but by a geologist. In the early 1990s, Dr. Robert Skock of Boston University brought a geologist's eye to the physical body of the Sphinx and its surrounding enclosure. What he saw was not the wear and tear of 4,500 years of wind and sand, but something dramatically different. The core of his argument rests on the distinct patterns of erosion visible on the limestone walls of the Sphinx enclosure. Dr. Skock identified deep, vertical, undulating fissures and scooped out cavernous hollows that run down the sides of the enclosure. This type of weathering, he argued, is characteristic of one primary force: prolonged and heavy rainfall, water that has cascaded over the limestone for centuries, dissolving and channeling its way through the softer layers of rock. The key word here is prolonged. This wasn't the result of a few flash floods. This was the signature of a consistently wet climate. This single observation leads to a chronological paradox of staggering proportions. The climatic history of Egypt is well documented. The hyper-arid desert conditions that define the region today have been firmly in place since at least the middle of the 3rd millennium before the Common Era. The last time the Giza Plateau experienced a period of significant, sustained rainfall was at the end of the last ice age, during what is known as the Neolithic subpluvial, a wet phase that ended around the middle of the 4th millennium BCE. If the primary erosion on the Sphinx enclosure was caused by thousands of years of heavy rain, then the monument must have been standing exposed to the elements during that much earlier, wetter epoch. This pushes its construction date back to a period perhaps as early as 7,000 or even 9,000 years ago, a time when, according to conventional history, the people of the Nile Valley were simple hunter-gatherers or just beginning to practice early agriculture, incapable of the complex social organization and engineering required to carve a monument of such scale. The reaction from the mainstream Egyptological community was, and remains, one of strong skepticism. The primary counterargument is a compelling one. The erosion, they contend, is not from rain at all, but from other processes. One leading theory is that the weathering is the result of wind and sand. The prevailing winds on the plateau, carrying abrasive sand particles, could have scoured the limestone over millennia, creating the rounded, flowing shapes. Another explanation points to the effects of haloclasty, a process where salt crystals form within the porous limestone. As groundwater rises and evaporates in the heat, it leaves behind salt, which expands as it crystallizes, forcing the stone to exfoliate and spall off in layers. Since the Sphinx enclosure sits at a low point on the plateau, it would be particularly susceptible to this kind of groundwater-induced weathering, which can create deep pits and recesses that might be mistaken for water erosion. Yet, Dr. Skok and his supporters present a powerful visual and geological rebuttal. They invite us to perform a simple but revealing comparison. Look at the erosion on the Sphinx enclosure itself, the deep, vertical channels, the rounded, undulating contours. Then, examine the weathering on the nearby tombs that are definitively dated to the Old Kingdom, carved from the very same limestone formation. The difference is stark and undeniable. The Old Kingdom tombs show sharp, crisp angles and well-preserved tool marks. Their erosion is minimal and primarily consists of horizontal scouring from wind-blown sand. There is no evidence of the deep, rounded, vertical gouging seen on the Sphinx. If both the Sphinx and the tombs were exposed to the same environmental forces for the same amount of time, their weathering should be similar. The fact that they are so dramatically different strongly suggests that the Sphinx has been subjected to a different, and much older, set of climatic conditions. It implies that the Sphinx was already ancient, its enclosure already deeply weathered, when the pharaohs of the Fourth Dynasty began building their pyramids and tombs on the plateau above it. This theory opens the door to a breathtaking possibility, that the Sphinx is the work of a lost, pre-pharaonic civilization, an advanced culture that flourished during the wet period of the early Holocene. This society, now vanished from the historical record, would have possessed the knowledge and manpower to undertake such a colossal project. The later dynastic Egyptians, arriving millennia later, may have found this weathered, lion-shaped monument and, recognizing its power, recarved the head to resemble a pharaoh, possibly Khafre, and incorporated it into their own cosmic landscape. This would explain why the head of the Sphinx is so disproportionately small relative to the massive, leonine body. It is not the original head, but a later, pharaonic restoration of a much older, eroded original. The implications are, of course, revolutionary. It suggests that civilization, in the form of complex, monument-building societies, is far older than we have ever dared to imagine, and that the sands of Giza hold secrets not just of the pharaohs, but of a forgotten epoch whose name we do not even know. And so we come to a mystery that lies not in plain sight, but hidden within the very fabric of the Great Pyramid itself, a secret space revealed not by traditional archaeology, but by the ghostly touch of subatomic particles. For centuries, explorers and scholars have believed that the known chambers, the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, and the subterranean pit, were the entirety of the pyramid's internal structure. But what if the bulk of the pyramid is not solid stone, but contains vast, empty spaces, voids that have been sealed since the day it was built? This is not just speculation anymore. It is a scientific fact confirmed by one of the most ambitious scientific projects ever undertaken at Giza, the Scan Pyramids mission. Beginning in 2015, this international team of physicists and engineers employed a revolutionary technique called muon tomography to peer deep inside the stone without drilling a single hole. Muons are elementary particles that fall to Earth from the upper atmosphere, much like a constant, invisible rain. They can pass through hundreds of feet of stone, but they are absorbed more by dense material and pass more easily through empty space. By placing extremely sensitive muon detectors in known chambers like the Queen's Chamber, the team could map where these particles passed through the pyramid unobstructed, revealing the hidden architecture within. The results were nothing short of seismic. They confirmed the existence of a previously unknown, massive void located directly above the Grand Gallery. This is not a small construction gap, it is a defined space, estimated to be at least 30 meters long, with a cross-section similar to that of the Grand Gallery itself, making it one of the largest discoveries inside the pyramid in over a century. The orthodox explanation, offered by many Egyptologists, is one of structural necessity. They propose that this void, often called the Big Void, is a relieving chamber, part of a series of such spaces built to distribute the immense weight of the pyramid's masonry and prevent the Grand Gallery's corbelled ceiling from collapsing under the strain. We know this technique was used directly above the king's chamber, where a sophisticated system of 5 compartments, including the famous relieving chambers with their huge granite beams, was constructed to protect the chamber below. In this view, the newly discovered void is simply another, larger example of this brilliant but purely functional engineering. It is a necessary gap, an architectural feature that, while fascinating, holds no treasure and no secret knowledge, merely serving the practical purpose of keeping the structure standing for 4,500 years. This interpretation fits comfortably within the established understanding of the pyramid as a tomb, where the internal architecture was designed for eternity, not for mystery. However, the sheer scale and specific location of this void invite a far more tantalizing possibility. Why would the builders go to such extraordinary lengths to create a chamber of this magnitude, and then seal it off so completely that no access point, not even a hint of one, remains in any of the surrounding passages? If it were merely a relieving chamber, wouldn't we expect to see some evidence of its construction from adjacent corridors, or perhaps find similar, smaller voids throughout the structure? The fact that it is completely inaccessible suggests a level of intentional concealment that goes beyond simple engineering. This has led to the compelling, and for some electrifying theory that the Big Void is not empty at all, but a hidden chamber, a sealed repository that could contain almost anything. The most profound hope is that it holds a literal library of knowledge from a lost age, perhaps papyrus scrolls, metallic tablets, or artifacts from the legendary Hall of Records, a mythical archive said to contain the advanced scientific and spiritual wisdom of a pre-dynastic civilization. Imagine the implications of opening a time capsule from the pyramid's builders themselves, containing not golden trinkets, but the very blueprints for their technology, their understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and perhaps even the true purpose of the pyramid itself. Such a discovery would not just add a footnote to history, it would rewrite the entire first chapter of human civilization. The debate between these two views is a perfect microcosm of the entire field of pyramid studies, a clash between the cautious, evidence-based approach of mainstream archaeology and the expansive, paradigm-shifting speculations of alternative research. The mainstream position is prudent. Without direct physical evidence, any claim about the void's contents is pure conjecture. They argue that muon tomography can reveal the shape of emptiness, but it cannot tell us what, if anything, fills that emptiness. It could be a construction gap, a chamber filled with rubble, or it could indeed be a perfectly preserved room. To assume it is a treasure chamber is to project our own desires onto the data. On the other hand, proponents of the hidden chamber theory point out that the history of archaeology is littered with discoveries that were once dismissed as fantasy. The existence of the void itself was a fantasy until it was proven by science. They argue that the very fact that such a significant space was so expertly concealed is, in itself, a powerful form of evidence that its contents were meant to be protected forever. This leaves us at a thrilling and frustrating precipice. We have the technological proof of a monumental secret hidden within the world's most studied building. We know exactly where it is, yet we cannot reach it without potentially causing catastrophic damage to the pyramid's structure. The next step is the subject of intense international discussion. Do we drill a tiny, endoscopic camera through the stone to take the first look inside in millennia? Or do we develop even more advanced, non-invasive scanning techniques to glean more information first? The decision is not just scientific, it is ethical and cultural. The Great Pyramid is a World Heritage Site, and any invasive procedure must be considered with the utmost care. For now, the void remains a silent, inaccessible enigma, a blank space on the map that holds one of the greatest potentials for discovery or for disappointment in the modern age. It is a physical question mark built into the heart of the pyramid, a challenge to our curiosity and a promise that even after centuries of exploration, the Great Pyramid is still keeping its most profound secrets locked away. While we've marveled at grand monuments and potential power sources, some of the most compelling evidence for a lost scientific tradition isn't found in massive stone blocks, but in tiny, vibrant particles of color and the subtle application of corrosive substances. The ancient Egyptians were not just master architects, they were brilliant, early alchemists, operating with a chemical knowledge that seems to appear fully formed in the archaeological record. Consider the pigment known as Egyptian blue, one of the first synthetic colors ever created by human hands. This wasn't a simple clay or crushed mineral gathered from the ground. This was a manufactured product of stunning complexity, requiring a precise, multi-stage chemical recipe. To produce its brilliant azure hue, Egyptian artisans had to carefully combine limestone or chalk with a copper-containing mineral like malachite, along with a specific type of quartz sand, and heat this mixture in a furnace to a sustained temperature between 800 and 1000 degrees Celsius. This was not a simple bonfire. It was a controlled, high-temperature reaction that transformed these raw ingredients into calcium copper silicate, a stable, synthetic crystal that has retained its dazzling color for over 4,000 years. The sophistication here is breathtaking. They weren't just mixing paints, they were engineering crystals at a molecular level, a process that implies generations of experimentation and a deep, systematized understanding of materials and their reactions to heat. This proto-chemical expertise appears to extend beyond mere pigmentation and into the very heart of their most baffling construction feats. How did a culture with copper chisels carve intricate hieroglyphs and smooth vast surfaces of incredibly hard stone like granite and diorite? The conventional explanation of pounding with diorite stones, while effective for rough shaping, struggles to account for the fine, precise detail and the sheer efficiency required. This has led to a provocative theory. What if the Egyptians possessed a knowledge of corrosive chemistry? There are ancient accounts, including those from later historians, that mention a mysterious, stone-softening liquid. While often dismissed as legend, some modern experiments have shown that certain acids, like those derived from plants or fermented substances, can significantly weaken the crystalline structure of granite, making it far easier to work with simple tools. Applying such a chemical agent would allow an artisan to incise deep, clean lines into the stone with a copper chisel, or to polish a surface to a mirror finish with relative ease. The evidence is circumstantial but compelling. When you look at the flawless, almost fluid surfaces of the Serapeum Sarcophagi or the precise, sharp-edged hieroglyphs carved into granite obelisks, the results are exactly what you would expect from a technique that temporarily altered the stone's physical properties, rather than one that simply battered it into submission through brute force. The most direct and controversial artifact suggesting an understanding of electrochemistry brings us back to a device we touched on earlier, but which deserves a deeper look in this context, the so-called Baghdad Battery. Found not in Egypt but in neighboring Mesopotamia, and dating to the Parthian period, this simple clay jar contained an iron rod surrounded by a copper cylinder, sealed with an asphalt stopper. If filled with an acidic electrolyte like vinegar or grape juice, it becomes a basic galvanic cell, capable of producing a low-voltage electric current. The profound question for Egyptology is not whether this specific object was a battery, but what it represents, the knowledge of a fundamental electrochemical principle. If one culture in the ancient Near East understood this concept, is it so difficult to imagine that the Egyptians, with their advanced chemical prowess, might have discovered it as well? The implications for Egyptian technology are staggering. A small electrical current, even from a series of such cells, could have been used for electroplating, depositing a thin, even layer of gold or silver onto another metal surface. When we examine the flawless, mirror-like gold coatings on some of Tutankhamun's artifacts, which show no signs of the unevenness typical of fire gilding, it forces us to wonder if a more sophisticated, electrochemical method was secretly at play. This wouldn't require massive power, just a fundamental understanding of the reaction between dissimilar metals and an acid. Yet, this narrative of advanced, almost modern-like chemistry is met with strong and reasonable skepticism from the mainstream academic community. The primary counter-argument is one of evidence, or rather, the lack thereof. For Egyptian blue, the process, while complex, can be explained as the result of centuries of empirical trial and error in kiln and glass-making technology. They may not have understood the atomic theory behind the crystal formation, but they perfected a recipe that worked. Regarding stone softening chemicals, no residue of such corrosive agents has ever been conclusively identified on any worked stone surface in Egypt. The proponents of the pounding stone method argue that we have simply underestimated the skill, patience, and sheer number of workers available to the pharaohs. As for the Baghdad Battery, the most plausible orthodox explanation is that it was simply a sacred storage vessel for a scroll, with the iron and copper acting as a protective casing for a precious papyrus or parchment text. The absence of any wires, electrodes, or clear depictions of such devices in Egyptian art is a powerful argument against their widespread use. This leaves us with a fascinating dichotomy. On one hand, we have artifacts and achievements that seem to whisper of a sophisticated, systematic chemical knowledge. On the other, we have a complete absence of the supporting infrastructure, tools, and textual descriptions we would expect to find accompanying such a science. This paradox is the core of the mystery. Why does this advanced proto-chemistry appear so early, seemingly in a vacuum, and then become lost or fade into obscurity? One compelling theory is that this knowledge was not held by the general population, but was the closely guarded secret of a small, elite priesthood. These master artisans would have passed their formulas and techniques down orally, from master to apprentice, treating them as sacred mysteries rather than public knowledge. When that lineage was broken, by invasion, political collapse, or a simple loss of interest, the science died with its last practitioners. The vibrant blue on a tomb wall, and the impossibly smooth surface of a granite box, would then stand not as monuments to a publicly documented technology, but as silent, beautiful ghosts of a lost art, a chemistry that was so advanced for its time that its very existence continues to challenge our perception of the ancient world. Now, let's shift our focus from the hidden chambers and chemical mysteries to the very foundations of these incredible structures, to a feat of engineering that is visible from space, and yet so precise it defies simple explanation. We are talking about the breathtaking cardinal alignment of the Giza pyramids, and specifically, the Great Pyramid's near-perfect orientation to the four cardinal directions north, south, east, and west. This is not a rough approximation. It is an achievement of such staggering accuracy that it continues to be a subject of intense study and debate among engineers and astronomers. The Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned to true north with an error of just 3/60ths of a single degree. To put that almost incomprehensible precision into perspective, that's a margin of error of less than 2 arc-minutes. This means the pyramid's base is squared with the Earth's rotational axis with a level of exactness that would be challenging to replicate today, even with our advanced global positioning systems and laser theodolites. This was accomplished over 4,500 years ago, with what we believe were simple tools of rope, wood, and copper. The question this precision forces upon us is profound. Were the pyramid's builders merely brilliant astronomers, or did they command a lost form of geodetic science that gave them an almost supernatural understanding of our planet? The mainstream and most widely accepted theory provides an elegant solution rooted in celestial observation. This method, known as the simultaneous transit method, relies on tracking the circular motion of stars around the celestial pole. Imagine an ancient Egyptian astronomer, a priest scribe, on a clear, dark night. They would erect a vertical gnomon, a simple stake or rod, at the center of a leveled, circular area. As a specific circumpolar star, like Kochab or Mizar in the Big Dipper, made its eternal circuit around the North Star, The scribe would carefully mark the point on the ground where the star's shadow touched the edge of the circle at its furthest western and eastern points. By bisecting the angle between these two marks, they could draw a perfect east-west line. From this primary axis, establishing north and south is a simple matter of geometry, creating perfect right angles. This method is not only theoretically sound, but is also something the Egyptians, with their deep knowledge of the night sky, were perfectly capable of executing. It frames the pyramid's alignment as a monumental, yet ultimately achievable, application of patient astronomy and simple, clever geometry. However, when you scrutinize this elegant theory with the cold eye of an engineer, significant practical challenges emerge. The first issue is the sheer scale of the project. Establishing a baseline on a small, controlled area is one thing. Translating that line across a sprawling, uneven construction site the size of multiple football fields, and then maintaining its perfect accuracy while laying millions of multi-ton blocks, is an entirely different level of difficulty. Any tiny error in the initial observation would be magnified tremendously over such a vast distance. The second, and more critical, challenge is the celestial pole itself. Our planet wobbles on its axis in a 26,000-year cycle called precession. This means the position of the North Star changes slowly over centuries. The star we know as Polaris was not the North Star in 2500 BCE. It was in a completely different position in the sky. While the simultaneous transit method can work with any circumpolar star, the changing celestial landscape adds a layer of complexity and potential for long-term error that the builders would have had to account for with astonishing foresight. The 3/60th of a degree error is so minute that it seems to push the limits of what is possible with star sighting alone over such a massive area. This gap between the proposed method and the achieved result has fueled an alternative and compelling theory: that the pyramid builders possessed a lost or overlooked surveying technology grounded in terrestrial physics, rather than celestial observation. One fascinating proposal involves the use of something as simple and profound as a massive, water-filled trench. Imagine the builders creating a circular canal, perfectly level, around the intended perimeter of the pyramid. By observing the reflection of a specific star on the calm surface of the water, they could achieve a much more stable and accurate reading than with a single shadow-casting rod. This method effectively creates a giant, natural reflecting telescope, canceling out small local irregularities and providing a consistent, large-scale reference line. An even more intriguing terrestrial method involves the sophisticated use of the Merkit, a known Egyptian timekeeping and surveying instrument that functioned like a plumb bob. By tracking the shadow of a mnemonic instrument over the course of a year, particularly during the equinoxes when the sun rises and sets due east and west, the builders could have established their primary axes with solar, rather than stellar, precision. This solar method is less affected by the slow drift of precession and could theoretically account for the jaw-dropping accuracy we witness. Yet, for some researchers, even these advanced terrestrial methods do not fully close the logical gap. They point to the fact that the Great Pyramid is not just aligned to true north. Its position on the globe is also mathematically significant. The pyramid is located at the precise point where the longest land parallel and the longest land meridian intersect, effectively making it the center of the Earth's landmass. This cannot be a coincidence. It suggests a geographical knowledge of the planet that, by orthodox history, should have been impossible. This leads to the most radical interpretation that the builders possessed a deep, perhaps inherited, understanding of the Earth as a geometric and energetic entity. Could they have used a form of advanced geodesy, mapping the planet's gravitational or magnetic fields to find true north? We know the pyramid is placed with its sides facing the 4 cardinal directions, but it is also aligned with incredible precision to the Earth's poles. This implies a global perspective, a consciousness of the planet as a whole sphere. Such a concept is light years away from the standard image of an early Bronze Age culture. It paints a picture of a founding civilization that may have been the recipient of a far older, and now vanished, scientific tradition. A tradition that understood the world not just as a flat plane under a starry sky, but as a spinning globe whose fundamental axes could be locked in stone for eternity. The silent, perfect alignment of the Great Pyramid thus stands as one of its most deafening mysteries, a testament not just to observational skill, but to a potentially lost science of the Earth itself. This paradox lies at the very heart of the pyramid-building mystery, for in the shadow of these colossal stone achievements, archaeologists have uncovered the humble, almost pathetic tools believed to have created them, piles of soft copper chisels. According to the Orthodox narrative, these chisels, along with stone hammers and abrasive sand, were the primary instruments used to extract, shape, and finish the millions of stone blocks, including the immense quantities of brutally hard granite and diorite used throughout the Giza complex. We are asked to believe that a civilization capable of celestial alignment and engineering on a superhuman scale accomplished its most enduring work with tools that, by modern standards, seem laughably inadequate. The core of the problem is a fundamental mismatch between the material and the task. Copper is a soft metal. On the Mohs scale of mineral hardness, copper sits at a modest 3, while the granite quarried at Aswan, used for the king's chamber and the sarcophagi, is a 7. Quartz crystals, a primary component of granite, are themselves a 7 on the same scale. This means that every time a copper chisel struck a block of granite, it wasn't the stone that was being worn down, it was the chisel. Experiments have shown that a copper chisel used to pound on granite becomes blunted, deformed, and useless after just a few minutes of work. The edges curl over, and the tool must be constantly resharpened or discarded. To quarry and shape the thousands of tons of granite found in the Great Pyramid alone, the workers would have needed not just hundreds, but hundreds of thousands of these chisels, requiring a logistical operation for tool production and maintenance that would have been an immense undertaking in itself, yet for which we find surprisingly scant evidence. The mainstream explanation for this apparent contradiction relies on the clever use of a simple abrasive, sand. The theory is that the Egyptians didn't use copper chisels to directly cut the granite. Instead, they used them to guide or drive a far more effective cutting agent. For sawing large blocks, they might have used a copper saw, a large, flat blade without teeth. Workers would pour wet sand, rich in quartz particles, into the cut and then drag the saw back and forth. The hard quartz sand, harder than the copper but also harder than the granite, would become embedded in the soft copper blade. This transformed the saw into a kind of abrasive strip, where the sand particles did the actual cutting, grinding a groove slowly through the stone. Similarly, for drilling, a tubular copper drill would be used with sand slurry. As the tube was rotated, either by hand or with a bow, the abrasive sand trapped between the copper and the stone would grind away a circular channel, leaving behind a core. This method is physically possible and has been demonstrated in modern experiments. It accounts for the drilled cores found at various sites and provides a plausible, if painfully slow, mechanism for working hard stone. Yet, when we hold the results of these experimental recreations side by side with the actual artifacts left by the ancient workers, a significant discrepancy emerges. The saw and drill marks found on granite and diorite objects at Giza and elsewhere tell a different story. These marks are not what you would expect from a slow, grinding process with a soft metal and loose abrasive. Instead, they often show clean, deep, and continuous grooves. The feed rate, the speed at which the cutting tool advanced into the stone, appears to have been remarkably fast and forceful. On some artifacts, you can see that the saw marks are deep and widely spaced, suggesting a single, powerful cutting stroke, not the endless, patient back and forth of a sand-filled copper strip. Even more telling are the drill holes. As we saw with the Dixon core, some holes in granite exhibit a constant, smooth spiral groove with a depth and regularity that suggests a drill bit that was not only harder than the granite, but was also being fed into the stone with a consistent, substantial pressure. A copper tube drill with sand creates a rough, stippled surface inside the hole from the random crushing of the abrasive particles. It does not typically produce a single, perfect, spiraling groove. This physical evidence points towards a tool that was removing material efficiently and cleanly, a tool that was itself harder than the granite it was cutting. This glaring inconsistency has led to two compelling, albeit controversial, theories about a lost Egyptian metallurgy. The first suggests that the ancient smiths had discovered how to create a copper alloy far harder and more durable than anything we have found in the archaeological record. While we have found mostly pure copper tools, it is possible they possessed a secret formula, perhaps adding a small, undiscovered element or using a specific thermal treatment that created a work-hardened alloy with the toughness of modern steel. This super copper would have been rare, reserved for the most critical tasks, and perhaps all of it was recycled and melted down for other uses after the pyramids were completed, leaving behind only the common, soft copper chisels for us to find. The second, even more radical theory, posits that the Egyptians had access to a now-lost material altogether. Could they have been using tools made from a corundum-based compound, an early form of what we would call composite ceramic? Or perhaps they had even mastered the production of iron, but kept its use a closely guarded priestly secret, explaining why iron objects from this early period are so vanishingly rare, and were often treated as more precious than gold when they did appear. A handful of enigmatic iron artifacts, like the famous iron dagger from Tutankhamun's tomb, prove they had access to the material, albeit in small quantities, and understood its superior properties. Beyond the question of the tools themselves lies the possibility of an entirely different, more effective stone-working method that has simply not survived in the archaeological record because it left no physical trace. We return to the provocative idea of chemical assistance. Could the builders have used a plant-based or mineral-derived acidic paste that was applied to the granite's surface? Such a substance could have chemically weakened the bonds between the quartz and feldspar crystals in the granite, effectively turning its hard, unyielding surface into a softer, chalky layer that could then be easily scraped or shaped with even a copper tool. After the work was complete, a neutralizing agent or simply the passage of time would have returned the stone to its original hardness, leaving behind no visible residue for modern chemists to detect. This would explain the seemingly fluid, molded appearance of some granite artifacts and the ability to create intricate hieroglyphs with sharp, precise edges. Another lost method could involve the application of intense, localized heat, by rapidly heating a section of granite with a focused fire and then quickly cooling it with water. The thermal shock can cause the stone to spall and crack along predictable lines, allowing for the rough shaping of large blocks with minimal physical effort. While we have no direct depictions or texts describing these techniques, their potential effectiveness provides a tantalizing bridge between the tools we have found and the impossible perfection of the objects they supposedly created. The mystery of the copper tools, therefore, is not just about the metal in their hands, but about the vast, silent library of knowledge that may have existed in their minds, a library that closed its doors for good when the last master builder laid down his chisel for the final time. Yet as we stand in awe of these ancient quarries and the colossal monuments they supplied, we are often left with a haunting question. If the methods of the ancient builders are truly lost to history, is it possible for such knowledge to be rediscovered, or even independently reinvented? To explore this tantalizing possibility, we must take a dramatic leap forward in time and across the globe, to a humid stretch of land in Florida during the early 20th century. Here, a single, unassuming man performed a feat that seems to mirror the mysteries of the Nile, creating a modern enigma that stands as a powerful parallel to the puzzles of ancient Egypt. This is the story of Edward Leedskalnin and his incredible coral castle. Edward Leedskalnin was a Latvian immigrant, standing just 5 feet tall and weighing barely 100 pounds. Following a profound personal heartbreak, he dedicated 28 years of his life, from the early 1920s to the 1950s, to a solitary, secretive mission. Working almost entirely alone, mostly under the cover of night, he single-handedly quarried, shaped, transported, and erected over 1,100 tons of oolite limestone, a heavy and dense rock. The structures he built are not simple piles of stone. They include perfectly balanced, 9-ton gates that a child can push open with a single finger, massive obelisks, intricate rocking chairs carved from solid stone, a 22-ton Great Wall, and a functioning, accurate sundial. The scale of his achievement is staggering, but the true mystery lies in his method. How did one man, with no visible machinery, no large crew, and no formal engineering education, move blocks of stone that weighed many tons each? Leedskalnin was famously secretive about his techniques. When curious onlookers asked how he managed such feats, he would only offer cryptic replies, saying he understood the laws of weight and leverage, and famously claiming, "I have discovered the secrets of the pyramids." He left behind few clues, but among his sparse personal effects were handwritten pamphlets where he wrote about magnetism and the movement of what he called perpetual motion holders. He spoke of understanding the structure of cosmic energy and how to harness the forces that hold matter together. Witnesses reported seeing him work, but their accounts only deepened the mystery. They said he would place his hands on the massive stone blocks, sometimes with a simple tripod of wooden poles nearby, and hum or sing. They claimed the blocks would then, seemingly of their own accord, levitate or move into place. There were no groaning pulleys, no roaring engines, just the quiet, focused work of one man and the slow, impossible movement of immense weight. The conventional explanations offered for Coral Castle are numerous, but each one struggles to fully account for the evidence. The most common theory is that Leedskalnin was a brilliant, if eccentric, practical engineer who used simple tools like block and tackle systems, winches, levers, and fulcrums in exceptionally clever ways. He did own some common tools, including a collection of chain hoists, tripods, and old automobile parts that he may have repurposed. Proponents of this view argue that with a deep understanding of physics and immense patience, a single person could indeed move massive weights by multiplying force through clever mechanical advantage. They point to photographs showing him using a tripod to lift stones, suggesting he relied on brute force mechanics, just applied with a unique genius. However, when you subject this explanation to a practical test, it begins to fray at the seams. Let's take the case of the 9-ton revolving gate, one of Coral Castle's most famous features. It is a single, massive slab of stone, perfectly balanced on a simple automobile bearing, so exquisitely tuned that the slightest push sets it in motion. To achieve this balance with hand tools alone would require near superhuman precision in measuring the stone's center of mass and carving the pivot point. Furthermore, how did he transport the larger blocks, some weighing over 30 tons, from the quarry to their final positions? He claimed he never used modern heavy machinery, and when he decided to move his entire castle 10 miles from Florida City to its current location in Homestead, he hired a truck, but only to carry his tools. Witnesses said he simply dismantled the structures, loaded the massive stones onto the truck himself, and then reassembled them at the new site, all without the truck drivers ever seeing how he managed the loading and unloading. This level of logistical control with primitive tools seems to defy the very physics it purports to use. This is where the compelling parallel to ancient Egypt becomes impossible to ignore. Just as we find a mismatch between the copper chisels in the archaeological record and the flawless granite boxes in the Serapeum, we see a mismatch between the simple tools found at Leedskalnin's workshop and the monumental, precision stonework he left behind. This gap invites a radical possibility that Edward Leedskalnin had, as he claimed, genuinely rediscovered a lost principle of physics, one that the ancient pyramid builders might have also known. His cryptic writings about magnetism and cosmic energy lead some researchers to speculate that he had tapped into a knowledge of anti-gravity or acoustic levitation. The idea that sound vibrations, at specific resonant frequencies, can neutralize the effect of gravity on an object is a concept explored in both modern physics and ancient legend. If Leedskalnin had learned to generate and control such frequencies, it would explain the witness accounts of humming and the seemingly effortless movement of stone. It would also provide a stunningly elegant solution to the mysteries of both Coral Castle and the Egyptian pyramids, a single, lost technology that allows for the manipulation of massive stone with minimal applied force. The story of Coral Castle, therefore, is more than just a fascinating modern curiosity. It is a crucial piece of comparative evidence. It stands as a living testament that the seemingly impossible achievements of the ancients might not be impossible at all, but merely the product of a knowledge system that exists outside our current scientific mainstream. Edward Leedskalnin demonstrated that a single individual, without vast resources or a large workforce, could replicate the scale and precision of megalithic construction. His life's work screams a powerful message across the decades. The secrets of the ancients may not be buried in the sand, but waiting to be rediscovered in the mind of a determined and brilliant individual. He proved that the gap between our understanding and their achievement might be bridged not by finding a new artifact, but by unlocking a new idea about the fundamental nature of weight, leverage, and the hidden forces that shape our world. In the quiet, sun-bleached stones of his Florida castle, we find a modern echo of the same profound mystery that haunts the deserts of Egypt, a challenge to our assumptions and a beacon of hope that the greatest secrets of the past may still be within our grasp. But perhaps the most intimate and personal of all these mysteries lies not in stone, but in flesh and bone itself. As we push the boundaries of modern science, we've begun to apply its most powerful tools to the ancient Egyptians themselves, extracting secrets from the very DNA of the pharaohs. The results, particularly from the royal mummies of the New Kingdom, have been startling, revealing unexpected genetic threads that weave a story far more complex than the one told by hieroglyphs alone. This is not about finding intact genetic material, which is incredibly rare after millennia of degradation, but about analyzing the tiny fragments that have survived, using sophisticated statistical models to peer into the deep ancestry of these legendary rulers. And what this genetic window has revealed, in some cases, are lineages that simply don't fit the established map of the ancient world. Consider the controversial and hotly debated studies surrounding the family of Tutankhamun. Genetic analysis of the so-called heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, his father, and Tutankhamun himself has suggested the presence of a genetic marker known as haplogroup R1b. This is particularly common in populations across Western Europe, a finding that sent shockwaves through both the academic community and the public imagination. How could a genetic signature so strongly associated with Europeans appear in the heart of an 18th dynasty Egyptian royal line? The implications are profound. It suggests a point of distant, shared ancestry with populations that, according to our conventional historical models, should have been completely disconnected from the Nile Valley. This doesn't mean the pharaohs were European, but it does indicate that the genetic history of the ancient world was a tangled web of migrations and interactions that we are only beginning to unravel. It forces us to consider the possibility of long-distance movements, forgotten trade routes, or the influence of enigmatic sea peoples and other migratory groups that could have introduced these genetic threads centuries or even millennia before the age of the pharaohs. Beyond these specific haplogroups, some studies have pointed to other physical anomalies preserved in the mummies themselves. Certain royal mummies display skeletal features that some physical anthropologists have described as atypical for the indigenous populations of the region. These can include distinctive cranial shapes, unusual statures, or specific dental traits that find closer parallels with populations from North Africa, the Levant, or even more distant regions. While physical anthropology is a nuanced field, and environmental factors like diet and cultural practices can shape the skeleton, the consistency of some of these traits within specific royal lineages is difficult to dismiss. They hint at a practice of royal intermarriage with foreign princesses to secure political alliances, a practice we know occurred, but perhaps on a much wider geographic scale than previously believed. Could the Egyptian court have been a genetic melting pot, drawing in elite bloodlines from across the Mediterranean and Western Asia, connecting the Nile to a vast and forgotten network of ancient kingdoms? The mainstream scientific response to these findings is one of extreme caution, and for good reason. The primary challenge is the extreme degradation of ancient DNA. The hot Egyptian climate and the chemical processes of mummification itself are devastating to genetic material. There is a constant and serious risk of contamination from modern DNA, either from the archaeologists and lab technicians who handle the remains or from the countless people who have been in contact with the mummies over the centuries. Many of the most sensational claims have been vigorously challenged on methodological grounds, with critics arguing that the samples were compromised or that the statistical analysis was flawed. The orthodox view maintains that the genetic makeup of the pharaonic lines, while perhaps showing some diversity from neighboring regions like Nubia or the Near East, was fundamentally rooted in Northeast Africa. They argue that until we have a much larger and more pristine dataset, any single anomalous finding should be treated as a potential artifact of contamination rather than a historical fact. Yet, even with this necessary skepticism, the mere possibility of these genetic anomalies forces a monumental shift in perspective. If verified, they challenge the very idea of ancient Egypt as an isolated, monolithic civilization. They paint a picture of a dynamic, interconnected world where the Nile Valley was a hub in a global network of exchange that spanned continents. This isn't just about adding new branches to the family tree. It's about questioning the roots of the tree itself. Were the foundations of Egyptian civilization the product of a purely indigenous development, or were they significantly influenced by multiple waves of migration and cultural fusion from outside? The genetic whispers from the mummies suggest that the history of this great civilization is not a simple, linear story of pharaohs succeeding pharaohs, but a complex tapestry woven from threads that may have originated in lands we are only now beginning to connect to their story. It suggests that the sand of the desert holds not just the secrets of the Egyptians, but the genetic footprints of the entire ancient world. But just as we begin to think the grandest structures have all been found, we uncover a tale of a monument so immense it dwarfs even the pyramids in its reported complexity, a place that has slipped from the physical world into the realm of near myth. Our journey takes us now to the site of Hawara, in the Fayum Oasis, home to the somewhat ruined pyramid of the 12th dynasty pharaoh Amenemhat III. Yet it is not this pyramid that captures our imagination, but what once stood beside it, according to one of history's most famous travelers. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Egypt in the 5th century before the Common Era, recorded an account of a structure that has haunted archaeologists and explorers ever since. He described a colossal labyrinth, built as a grand funerary complex for the 12 kings who ruled from the city of the crocodile god, Sobek. His description is staggering, almost unbelievable. He claimed it contained 3,000 rooms, 1,500 above ground and 1,500 below, all connected by a bewildering maze of winding passages and courtyards. He wrote that the roofs were made entirely of stone, the walls were covered with carved figures, and it adjoined a pyramid. So awestruck was Herodotus that he declared, "The pyramids are too vast for words, but the labyrinth surpasses even the pyramids." For centuries, this account was dismissed as one of his more fanciful exaggerations, a traveler's tall tale. After all, how could a structure of such monumental scale, with thousands of rooms, simply vanish without a trace? The mystery only deepens when we consult other classical authors. The Roman geographer Strabo also claimed to have visited the labyrinth, describing it as a great palace composed of many palaces, a sentiment echoed by the historian Pliny the Elder. These multiple independent accounts from respected figures of antiquity lend a powerful credibility to the story. They weren't all merely copying Herodotus. They were reporting on a place that, in their era, was still unknown, albeit perhaps already decaying, wonder of the world. So if it was so grand and so well attested, where did it go? The answer lies in the very landscape of Hawara. The site sits at the edge of the fertile Fayum, a region whose water levels have fluctuated dramatically over millennia. Over the centuries, the stone from the labyrinth was systematically quarried for other building projects in the region. The relentless encroachment of sand and the rising water table did the rest, submerging and burying the ruins under many meters of silt and groundwater. What was once a sprawling, awe-inspiring complex was gradually erased from the surface, its location fading from memory until it became little more than a legend scribbled in an ancient book. This is where modern technology enters the story, transforming a 2,000-year-old legend into a tangible, 21st-century archaeological mystery. In 2008, a team from Belgium's University of Ghent and Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities undertook a groundbreaking geophysical survey of the area around the Hawara Pyramid. Using a non-invasive technique called electrical resistivity tomography, which maps subsurface structures by measuring the electrical resistance of the soil, they scanned the vast, flat plain. The results, published in the journal Near Surface Geophysics, were nothing short of spectacular. The scans revealed the clear and unmistakable signature of a gigantic, artificial structure buried deep beneath the sand. The data showed a grid-like pattern of walls, an arrangement of countless rooms and halls, extending over an area larger than several football fields placed side by side. The sheer scale of the underground anomaly was breathtaking, perfectly matching the descriptions left by Herodotus and Strabo of a vast, multi-chambered complex. It appeared that the ancient historians were not exaggerating after all. They were describing a real, physical place, a labyrinth that had not vanished, but had simply been waiting, hidden under the earth, for its story to be uncovered. The discovery of this buried complex raises a question that is as profound as the structure itself. Why has such a colossal site not been excavated? The reasons are both practical and sobering. The water table in the Fayum region is now perilously high. The labyrinth lies submerged in a soup of mud and brackish water, making traditional excavation incredibly difficult, expensive, and potentially destructive. Digging could cause the fragile, waterlogged remains to collapse. Furthermore, the political and logistical challenges of mounting a multi-year, multi-million-dollar underwater archaeological dig are immense. For now, the labyrinth remains protected by the very water that conceals it, its secrets held in a state of suspended animation. This enforced delay, however, only fuels the speculation about what might lie within those 3,000 water-filled rooms. Could it be the ultimate repository of forgotten knowledge, a library to rival Alexandria, containing the lost records of the pharaohs and the advanced sciences of a bygone age? Might it hold the answers to the very mysteries we have been exploring, the true purpose of the pyramids, the origins of the Sphinx, or the full story of the enigmatic civilization that preceded dynastic Egypt? The Labyrinth of Hawara stands as the ultimate unopened treasure chest, a silent, submerged city of stone, whose discovery confirms that some of the greatest wonders of the ancient world are not lost, but merely sleeping, waiting for the day when we possess the will and the technology to finally unveil their long-guarded secrets. For centuries, the city of Thonis Heracleon was a ghost in the historical record, a place mentioned by the Greek historian Herodotus as a fabulously wealthy port where Egypt met the Mediterranean world. He spoke of a grand temple dedicated to the god Amun-Jareb, where pharaohs would journey to receive their legitimacy as rulers of the two lands. For over 1,000 years, it was considered a legend, a mythical city lost to the sea, its existence unproven and slowly fading into the realm of poetic fiction. Then, in the year 2000, after years of painstaking geophysical surveys, French underwater archaeologist Frank Gaudio and his team made a discovery that would send shockwaves through the academic world. Emerging from the thick, dark mud of the Bay of Aboukir, just off the coast of modern-day Alexandria, were the colossal, silent forms of a sunken civilization. It was not just a few scattered ruins, it was an entire city, frozen in time beneath the waves. What they began to uncover was nothing short of an underwater museum of unimaginable scale and preservation. The first and most breathtaking sights were the giant statues. A monumental red granite statue of a Ptolemaic queen, her regal features still perfectly defined, lay on the seabed. Nearby, a massive statue of the god Hapi, the deity of the Nile's annual flood, was found, a symbol of fertility and abundance that had ironically sunk beneath the very waters he represented. These statues, along with a stunning 5-meter-tall head of a pharaoh carved from red granite, were not merely art. They were proclamations of power and piety, meant to line the city's grand canals and temple avenues. Alongside them, the archaeologists discovered dozens of limestone sarcophagi, some still containing the remains of the sacred animals they were meant to protect, and the wrecks of 64 ancient ships, their hulls preserved in the oxygen-depleted clay, providing an unparalleled snapshot of ancient naval architecture. Perhaps the most crucial finds, however, were the giant stelae, or stone slabs, covered in beautifully preserved hieroglyphs. One such stela, a near duplicate of the famous Rosetta Stone, was discovered, bearing a royal decree in both Egyptian and Greek. It was these inscriptions that confirmed, beyond any doubt, that this sunken metropolis was indeed the legendary Thonis Heracleon, the single, mandatory port of entry for all trade and travel from the Greek world into Egypt for centuries. This discovery solved one major historical puzzle, the city's location, but immediately presented an even more compelling one. How does a city of such immense importance, a bustling hub of international commerce, and a central node in the religious life of the nation, simply vanish from the map and sink into the sea? The answer lies not in a single cataclysmic event, but in a perfect and tragic storm of geological and human factors. The city was built on the unstable clay and silt of the Nile Delta, a region constantly being reshaped by the river's deposits. While this provided fertile ground for agriculture, it created a fragile foundation for a city of stone. Over the centuries, the weight of the massive temples, statues, and buildings, combined with the constant settling of the waterlogged soil, caused the land to slowly compact and subside. This gradual sinking was likely the primary culprit, a slow-motion disaster that played out over generations. However, geology alone didn't doom Heraclean. A series of natural disasters likely delivered the final, crushing blows. Researchers have found compelling evidence of massive liquefaction events, where the water-saturated ground temporarily loses its strength and behaves like a liquid, often triggered by earthquakes. The region is known to be seismically active, and a major tremor, or perhaps a series of them, would have been catastrophic for a city already perched on unstable ground. Such an earthquake could have caused entire sections of the city to simply collapse into the water or triggered a tsunami that inundated the low-lying port. The combination of these forces, the slow, inexorable subsidence, and the sudden, violent shock of an earthquake proved too much for the city's foundations. The very earth upon which Heraclean was built turned from a solid foundation into a liquid tomb, swallowing the city's grandeur and consigning it to the mud for over a millennium. Its memory faded from all but the oldest historical texts, its existence becoming a surprise not because it was small or insignificant, but because the sea had kept its secrets so perfectly, preserving a time capsule of a lost world in the silent, dark depths of the bay. But for all the grandeur of sunken cities and colossal statues, sometimes the most haunting connection to the past comes not from a monument, but from a single, penetrating human gaze. Imagine an archaeologist in the late 19th century, carefully unwrapping a mummy from the Roman era in the Fayum region of Egypt. The linen strips fall away, and instead of the stylized mask of a god or a symbolic representation of the deceased, they are met with the incredibly lifelike face of a person who lived 2,000 years ago. These are the Fayum portraits, and to look into their eyes is to experience a profound chronological shock. Painted on wooden panels and placed directly over the face of the mummified individual, these are not idealized or symbolic renderings. They are breathtakingly realistic portraits, capturing the unique features, expressions, and even the fashion of a people living in Egypt between the 1st and 3rd centuries of the Common Era. The individuals depicted feel immediately, strikingly familiar. You see young men with carefully trimmed beards and thoughtful eyes, women with intricate jeweled hairstyles and elegant gold earrings, and children with solemn, direct gazes. They look like people you might pass on the street today, and this creates a powerful and intimate bridge across the centuries that the more formal art of the pharaohs rarely provides. The technique used to create these vivid likenesses is as remarkable as the results themselves. The artists employed a method known as encaustic painting, a sophisticated process that involves mixing pigments with heated beeswax. This molten wax medium allowed for an extraordinary range of effects. The artist could apply it thickly to create a rich, impasto texture for jewelry and clothing, capturing the play of light on a gemstone or the fold of a tunic. They could also use it thinly for delicate glazes to model the soft shadows and subtle transitions of flesh, giving the faces a warm, lifelike vitality. In some portraits, you can even see the individual brush strokes or the marks of a metal spatula used to manipulate the wax, a testament to the direct, confident hand of the artist. This wasn't a quick sketch, it was a masterful application of a difficult and demanding medium, requiring speed and skill as the wax cooled and hardened. The result is a portrait with a stunning depth and luminosity, a durability that has allowed these faces to survive for 2 millennia with their colors still remarkably vibrant, as if they were painted only yesterday. This explosion of hyperrealism stands in the starkest possible contrast to the artistic tradition that dominated Egypt for 3,000 years. Pharaonic art was not concerned with capturing a fleeting, individual moment or a unique personal appearance. It was a sacred, formal language designed for eternity. Its rules were rigid and symbolic. Figures were shown in composite views, the shoulders frontal, the head and legs in profile, to display each part of the body in its most recognizable form. Size denoted importance, not perspective. The pharaoh was always shown as a powerful, youthful, and idealized figure, a god-king far removed from the realm of ordinary human frailty. The purpose was not to represent an individual as they were in life, but to create a perfected, eternal vessel for the soul, or Ka, in the afterlife. The art was a magical tool for resurrection, not a mirror of mortal existence. The Fayum portraits, therefore, represent a complete and sudden break from this ancient, deeply entrenched system. They are a declaration of a different worldview, one that valued the individual, the personal, and the transient beauty of a single human life. So why did this radical shift occur at this specific moment in history? The answer lies in a profound cultural fusion. By the 1st century, Egypt had been a province of the Roman Empire for decades, but the region, and the Fayum in particular, had a large and prosperous population of Greek settlers who had been there since the time of Alexander the Great. The individuals depicted in these portraits were likely the descendants of these Greek colonists and the local Egyptian population, a multicultural, middle-class elite who had adopted Roman citizenship and customs. Their artistic tastes were shaped by the classical traditions of Greece and Rome, traditions that celebrated naturalism and portraiture. From the Greeks, they inherited the pursuit of ideal human beauty, and from the Romans, a particular fascination with veristic, or truth-telling, portraiture that didn't shy away from age, character, or individuality. Yet they also held onto the ancient Egyptian funerary practice of mummification and the belief in an afterlife. The Fayum portrait is the beautiful hybrid product of this collision of worlds, a Roman-style portrait, painted with Greek artistic sensibility, applied to the distinctly Egyptian religious practice of mummification. It was a way for these people to have it all to present their unique, worldly identity to the society they lived in, while also ensuring their recognizable soul had a face for the eternity promised by the land they called home. This makes their sudden disappearance from the historical record by the 4th century all the more puzzling. For a few hundred years, this vibrant, personal art form flourished, and then it vanished completely. The reason was another great cultural shift, the rise of Christianity throughout the Roman Empire. As the new religion took hold, traditional Egyptian and Greco-Roman pagan funerary practices, including mummification, were abandoned in favor of Christian burial rites. The entire theological and cultural framework that gave the portraits their meaning simply collapsed. Furthermore, early Christian art moved away from the naturalistic depiction of individuals and toward a more symbolic, spiritual, and hieratic style, one that echoed, in a strange way, the formal rules of ancient Egypt. The focus was now on representing saints, biblical scenes, and the divinity of Christ, not the mortal features of a single believer. The exquisite skill of the encaustic technique, so perfectly suited for capturing fleeting life, was no longer in demand for funerary purposes. The knowledge faded, the workshops closed, and this window into the faces of the ancient world was shuttered for over 1,000 years, not to be rediscovered until the modern era. The Fayum portraits thus stand as a poignant and isolated moment in art history, a brilliant flicker of profound realism that emerged from a unique cultural crossroads, only to be extinguished by the winds of religious change, leaving behind a gallery of silent, watchful faces to wonder at what might have been. And so our journey brings us to one of the most elegantly simple, yet profoundly debated, artifacts in all of Egyptology. Discovered in 1898 during the excavation of a tomb at Saqqara, dating to around 200 years before the Common Era, this object is known as the Saqqara Bird. At first glance, it seems unassuming. Carved from a single piece of sycamore wood, it's a sleek, stylized figure measuring about 14 centimeters long, with a wingspan of roughly 18 centimeters. It resembles a bird in flight, but a second look reveals something startlingly out of place. Instead of the horizontal, fanned tail you would expect on a bird, this artifact has a distinct, upright tail fin, perfectly vertical and shaped like a modern airplane's stabilizer. This single, anomalous feature has launched a mystery that flies directly in the face of conventional history, transforming a potential toy from an Egyptian tomb into a potential blueprint for a technology that wouldn't be understood for another 2,000 years. The orthodox interpretation offered by mainstream Egyptology is grounded in practicality and symbolism. It is officially catalogued as a ceremonial object, likely a representation of a falcon. The falcon was deeply sacred in ancient Egypt, associated with the sky god Horus. In this context, the object could have been a votive offering, placed in a tomb to ensure the deceased's safe passage and protection in the afterlife under the watchful eye of a divine bird. Alternatively, it's often suggested that it was simply a child's toy, a finely carved plaything that happened to survive the millennia. The vertical tail, in this traditional view, is not a stabilizer at all, but perhaps a stylized representation of the bird's legs, or maybe a base that allowed the object to be displayed on a flat surface. This explanation places the Saqqara bird comfortably within the known artistic and cultural practices of its time, requiring no leaps of faith or assumptions about lost technology. It is an elegant, symbolic artifact, nothing more. Yet, the moment you hold this object in your hand and consider its form with an engineer's eye, the conventional explanation begins to feel insufficient. The design is just too specific, too functionally suggestive. The wings are not flat, they are aerofoil-shaped, meaning they are thicker at the leading edge and taper to a thinner trailing edge, a design that creates lift by manipulating air pressure, a principle formally discovered by Bernoulli in the 18th century. And that vertical tailfin is the real clincher. In nature, no bird has a vertical tailfin. It serves no purpose in avian biology. In aviation, however, a vertical stabilizer is absolutely essential for preventing an aircraft from spinning out of control by providing lateral stability. The presence of this feature on the Saqqara bird is what separates it from every other bird depiction in ancient Egyptian art. It appears to be a component designed not for biological accuracy, but for aerodynamic function. This compelling visual evidence spurred a series of remarkable real-world tests. In 2006, a leading aerodynamics expert and former construction manager for Lockheed Martin, Simon Sanderson, decided to put the Saqqara bird to the test. He built several precise, scaled-up models of the artifact. His findings were stunning. Without any modifications whatsoever, the model demonstrated excellent gliding capabilities. It was stable and could glide for considerable distances when launched. However, Sanderson noted one flaw: the lack of a small, horizontal stabilizer, or elevator, on the tail. This caused the model to pitch upwards and stall. Intriguingly, he discovered that by adding just this one small, missing component, a horizontal piece on the tail, the Saqqara bird model transformed into a highly efficient glider, capable of smooth, stable, and long-distance flight. This experiment provided powerful, tangible evidence that the object's design was not merely decorative, but inherently aerodynamic. The ancient craftsman, whether by incredible intuition or deliberate knowledge, had carved a shape that harnessed the fundamental principles of flight. The debate, therefore, centers on a single, critical question: is the Saqqara bird's aerodynamic prowess a result of brilliant design or a spectacular coincidence? The mainstream view holds that it is a lucky accident. A skilled woodcarver, aiming for a stylized bird, created a shape that, purely by chance, happens to have gliding properties. The vertical tail was an artistic choice, and the aerofoil wings were simply an easy shape to carve from a piece of wood. Proponents of this view argue that if the Egyptians truly understood aviation, we would find more evidence blueprints, larger models, or references in their texts. The absence of a supporting technological context makes the advanced knowledge theory difficult to sustain. On the other side of the debate, the possibility remains that this artifact is a fossilized glimpse of a lost line of inquiry. Perhaps it was a test model, a prototype for a larger, ceremonial glider used in religious festivals. Maybe it represents the work of a single, brilliant, and observant mind, an ancient Da Vinci who studied the flight of birds and seeds and experimented with aerodynamic shapes, a line of research that was never pursued on a larger scale. The idea that it could have been a child's toy is not even mutually exclusive with this theory. After all, the balsa wood gliders we give to children today are also based on sophisticated aerodynamic principles. The Saqqara Bird, in its silent, wooden elegance, forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge. It stands as a testament to the fact that the ancient mind was just as capable of observation, experimentation, and intuitive leaps as our own. Whether a toy, a symbol, or a prototype, it soars as a powerful reminder that the seeds of great ideas can be planted in the most unexpected places, even in the quiet darkness of a tomb. Beyond the mysteries of hidden chambers and lost technologies lies a puzzle woven into the very dimensions of the Great Pyramid itself. A silent language of numbers and ratios that speaks to a potentially staggering comprehension of our world and the cosmos. When we shift our gaze from the physical stones to the abstract mathematics they represent, we encounter a series of numerical relationships so precise and intentional that they challenge the idea that this structure was conceived with simple tools and an elementary understanding of mathematics. One of the most famous and compelling of these relationships is the connection between the pyramid's original height and the perimeter of its base. If you take the perimeter of the base and divide it by twice the original height, the result is a figure astonishingly close to the mathematical constant pi, approximately 3.1416. This is not a rough estimate, it is a relationship baked into the fundamental proportions of the building. To achieve this, the builders would have needed to understand that the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter is a constant value, a concept that, in our standard history books, was not formally calculated with such accuracy until thousands of years later by the Greeks. How could such a relationship occur? The mainstream explanation offers a practical, if remarkable, theory. It suggests that the ancient Egyptians may have discovered this ratio indirectly through a wheel-based measurement system. Imagine a worker rolling a ceremonial wheel or drum a specific number of times to mark out the length of one side of the base. The total distance traveled by the wheel's circumference, multiplied by the number of revolutions, could have inherently encoded the value of pi into the base's dimensions without the builders ever needing to define it as an abstract mathematical constant. In this view, the pi relationship is a happy accident of a practical construction technique, a byproduct of a wheel's natural geometry being translated into a linear measurement. It reflects a brilliant empirical understanding of a principle, even if they lack the formal theoretical framework we use today. This interpretation places the achievement within the realm of advanced, yet purely practical, engineering genius. However, this single pi correlation is just the beginning of a much deeper numerical tapestry. When we examine the pyramid's location on the globe, the numbers become even more cosmic. The Great Pyramid is situated at the precise latitude of 29.9792 degrees north. This number is not random. If you square it, you get approximately 898. Now consider the speed of light, measured in millions of meters per second, which is 299.792458. The numerical parallel between the pyramid's latitude and the speed of light is striking, suggesting the builders might have intentionally positioned the monument as a terrestrial marker for a fundamental constant of the universe. Could this be possible? Mainstream scholars dismiss this as an incredible coincidence, a classic case of epiphania, the human tendency to find meaningful patterns in random data. They argue that the ancient Egyptians had no concept of the meter as a unit of measurement, let alone the speed of light, which wasn't measured until the 17th century. The match, they contend, is a numerical fluke, a product of our modern minds searching for significance in an ancient choice that was likely based on entirely different, perhaps astrological or geodetic, considerations. Yet, the mathematical signatures do not stop there. The pyramid's original height was planned to be 280 royal cubits, and the length of one side of its base was 440 cubits. The ratio between the height and half the base perimeter is a close approximation of the golden ratio, phi, approximately 1.618, a proportion revered for its aesthetic and natural harmony. Furthermore, the pyramid's base perimeter is found to be virtually equal to 1/2 of 1 minute of 1 degree of latitude at the equator. This means the builders seemingly crafted a structure that not only encoded pi and phi, but also served as a scale model of the northern hemisphere, with its dimensions reflecting the Earth's curvature and size. This points toward a knowledge of geodetics, the science of measuring the Earth that is utterly anachronistic. The argument for a lost, advanced science gains momentum from this accumulation of evidence. It seems statistically improbable that so many sophisticated mathematical and geographical constants could be randomly converged in a single structure. Proponents of this view argue that the pyramid was designed as a repository of fundamental knowledge, a stone encyclopedia built to survive the ages, encoding the precise measurements of our planet and its relationship to cosmic laws for a future civilization ours to eventually decipher. This leads us directly from the mathematics of the Earth to the mathematics of the sky, for the Great Pyramid's alignments are as celestial as they are terrestrial. The structure's four sides are aligned with the four cardinal directions with an accuracy of better than 1/15 of a degree, an engineering marvel we've already explored. But this precision extends beyond mere north-south orientation. The descending and ascending passageways inside the pyramid are inclined at very specific angles. The descending passage, for instance, is aligned to a precise 26.18 degrees. During the era of the pyramid's construction, this angle would have pointed directly toward the pole star of that epoch, Alpha Draconis, also known as Thuban. This was not the celestial North Pole, but the star that circled it, and the alignment would have held profound religious significance for a culture whose afterlife beliefs were deeply connected to the circumpolar, imperishable stars. Similarly, the southern shafts emanating from the king's chamber were precisely angled to target the belt of the constellation Orion, associated with the god Osiris, and the northern shafts pointed toward the circumpolar stars, the eternal destination of the pharaoh's soul. The Orthodox interpretation sees this as a beautiful and sophisticated form of astrotheology, where the pyramid served as a physical machine to assist the king's spiritual journey to the stars, aligning his tomb with the very constellations he sought to join. However, an even more radical astronomical theory, known as the Orion correlation theory, takes this a step further. Proposed by authors Robert Bovell and Adrian Gilbert, the theory posits that the layout of the three main Giza pyramids mirrors the arrangement of the three stars in Orion's belt. When you map the pyramids and the stars, the correlation is visually compelling, but Bovell added a breathtaking temporal dimension. He noted that due to the phenomenon of precession, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis over a 26,000-year cycle, the position of the stars in the sky slowly changes over millennia. By calculating the precessional shift, Bovell argued that the perfect match between the pyramids and Orion's belt occurred not in 2500 BCE, but in 10,500 BCE, a date that plunges the origins of the Giza complex back into the depths of prehistory. This theory suggests that the plan for the Giza Plateau was conceived by a vastly older, advanced civilization that witnessed the sky in that specific configuration, and that the pharaohs of the Fourth Dynasty merely executed a pre-existing, sacred blueprint. Mainstream Egyptology roundly rejects this, pointing out that the correlation is not topographically perfect, and that the archaeological evidence for continuous, dynastic development at Giza is overwhelming. They see the alignment as symbolic rather than precise, a general homage to Osiris and the imperishable realm of the dead, not a star chart from a lost age. The debate between coincidence, symbolism, and advanced knowledge ultimately hinges on the sheer weight of the evidence. Is it more plausible that a culture with copper chisels and rope, through a series of incredibly fortunate accidents and practical methods, managed to build a structure that inadvertently models the value of pi, the golden ratio, the dimensions of the Earth, and the positions of key stars? Or does the accumulation of these precise, interlocking mathematical and astronomical facts point toward a deliberate, conscious effort to encode a sophisticated world into stone? The numerical and astronomical codes of the Great Pyramid present us with a choice between two narratives. One is a story of a brilliant but fundamentally ancient society, pushing the boundaries of empirical knowledge to its absolute limit for religious and political purposes. The other is the story of a legacy, a message in stone from a forgotten chapter in human history, a civilization so advanced that it understood the universe in ways we are only now rediscovering. The stones do not speak, but the numbers they form shout across the millennia, leaving us to decide whether we are witnessing the pinnacle of early Bronze Age achievement or the fading echo of a science that has yet to be fully reclaimed. This brings us to the final, and perhaps most speculative, entry on our list, a concept that, if true, would not just explain a single anomaly, but could unlock the entire mystery of ancient Egyptian construction. We've marveled at the impossible precision, the seamless joints, and the seemingly fluid shapes carved from granite and diorite. We've questioned how a culture with copper tools could achieve such feats. What if the answer isn't about harder tools, but about softer stone? This is the controversial theory of a lost technology of stone softening, the idea that the ancient builders possessed a chemical or botanical secret that could temporarily reduce solid rock to a pliable, clay-like consistency. The evidence for this is largely circumstantial, but it begins with the very appearance of the stones themselves. Look closely at some of the most famous megalithic sites in Egypt, particularly at the Valley Temple, next to the Sphinx at Giza. The colossal limestone blocks here don't just fit together tightly, they appear to be molded. The joints are so seamless that in many places, you cannot slip a piece of paper between them, and the surfaces often have a subtle, undulating, almost organic appearance, as if the stone was once soft and was pressed into place. Some blocks have strange, knob-like protrusions that seem to serve no structural purpose, but could be the points where the material was gripped or levered during a plastic state. This isn't the look of stone that has been pounded, chiseled, and sanded. It looks like it was worked and shaped while in a malleable condition. Proponents of this theory argue that we are not seeing the results of incredible labor, but of an incredible chemical process that fundamentally altered the properties of the material. This idea is bolstered by persistent anecdotal accounts from early explorers and even some colonial administrators. Perhaps the most famous story comes from the Spanish chroniclers of the conquest of the Inca, who reported that when they asked the indigenous people how the magnificent, perfectly fitted walls of Sacsayhuaman were built, the reply was that their ancestors knew of a plant whose juice could soften stone, allowing them to work it and mold it to the desired shape. While this story originates in South America, its implications ripple globally, suggesting that such a technology might not have been unique to one culture. In Egypt, similar tales have circulated for over a century. Some early 20th century travelers reported hearing local legends of a liquid, or poultice, that could make granite soft. Though these are unverified stories, they form a tantalizing thread of oral history that points toward a forgotten method, a secret known only to the master builders and lost with the decline of their civilization. The scientific plausibility of such a process is the central question. How could you possibly soften stone? One compelling hypothesis involves the use of organic acids. Granite, for instance, is primarily composed of feldspar, quartz, and mica. Feldspar is particularly susceptible to chemical weathering by acidic solutions. It's conceivable that the Egyptians discovered a potent, naturally occurring acid derived from a specific plant, perhaps a form of oxalic acid found in certain succulents or a highly concentrated vinegar, produced through a sophisticated fermentation process. Applying this acidic paste to the surface of the granite could have begun to dissolve the mineral bonds between the crystals, effectively turning the hard, crystalline surface into a softer, more gelatinous layer that could be easily carved, scraped, or even molded. After the work was complete, the acid would naturally neutralize or be washed away, and the stone would slowly re-harden, returning to its original, durable state and leaving behind no visible chemical residue for modern archaeologists to detect. This would elegantly explain the lack of tool marks on objects like the vases of Djoser, and the ability to create intricate, sharp-edged hieroglyphs in granite that look as if they were pressed into clay. Another, more complex theory moves beyond simple acids and into the realm of advanced geopolymer chemistry. This idea, championed by materials scientists like Joseph Davidovits, suggests that the Egyptians didn't quarry and carve all their stone, but rather cast it in place using a form of synthetic stone. In this scenario, the builders would have crushed relatively soft, natural limestone, mixed it with a reactive alkali binder, perhaps derived from natron or plant ash and water, to create a mineral slurry. This geopolymer concrete could then be poured into wooden molds, where a chemical reaction would cause it to set into a solid, dense stone that is chemically indistinguishable from natural limestone. This theory explains the molded appearance of the blocks, the perfect fits with no mortar, and the presence of what appear to be air bubbles and organic fibers trapped within some stones, which would be expected in a cast material, but not in a naturally quarried block. While this theory is hotly debated and struggles to account for the vast quantities of granite and other hard stones used, it provides a fascinating scientific framework for how a stone softening or stone reforming technology might have actually worked on a massive scale. If such a technology did exist, it would be the master key that unlocks every single construction impossibility we have discussed. The transportation of the 100-ton Serapeum Sarcophagi becomes a non-issue. You wouldn't need to move a 70-ton block of granite. You would transport a concentrated chemical paste and a bag of stone powder. The material could be mixed and poured directly inside the underground chamber, creating the sarcophagus in situ, perfectly seamless and flawlessly precise. The problem of the unfinished obelisk vanishes. Instead of millions of man-hours pounding with dolerite stones, workers could have applied a softening agent to the trench lines, allowing them to scoop out the granite with relative ease. The flawless, machine-like surfaces and the mysterious, spiraling drill marks on artifacts like the Dixon core become perfectly understandable. They are the result of working a temporarily softened material with simple tools, not of trying to cut through unyielding rock with soft copper. Even the mind-boggling precision of the pyramid's cardinal alignment becomes more achievable, as the foundational stones could have been adjusted and leveled while in a semi-plastic state, ensuring a perfect base that was truly and completely level. Of course, the mainstream archaeological view dismisses the stone softening theory as unnecessary and unsupported by evidence. Egyptologists point to the vast quarries, the thousands of recovered stone tools, and the clear evidence of traditional stone working techniques. They argue that the molded appearance is simply the result of skilled stonemasonry and millennia of weathering. The primary objection is the complete lack of any direct evidence, no recipes for such a chemical, no depictions of the process in tomb paintings, no residues analyzed from the stone surfaces. For a technology that would have been so revolutionary, its absence from the entire archaeological record is, for most scholars, proof that it never existed. They maintain that the known methods, however laborious, were sufficient, and that we continue to underestimate the sheer scale of the workforce and the profound patience and skill of the ancient Egyptian artisans. Yet, the theory persists because it offers such an elegant and comprehensive solution. It closes the logical gap between the tools we have found and the achievements we witness. It transforms the narrative from one of unimaginable toil to one of unimaginable knowledge. The lost technology of stone softening represents the ultimate what if. What if the pyramids and temples of Egypt are not just monuments to human labor, but to a forgotten science? What if the true secret of the pharaohs wasn't slaves and ramps, but a chemistry that allowed them to command the very earth, to shape stone as a potter shapes clay? This final find is less a physical artifact and more a paradigm, a different way of seeing the past. It challenges us to consider that the greatest achievements of antiquity may not have been built with brute force alone, but with a brilliant, sophisticated understanding of the natural world that was, tragically, lost to the sands of time, leaving behind only the perfect, silent stones to whisper of its existence. So we've traveled from the subterranean crypts of Dendera to the sunken city of Heracleion, from the confounding precision of the Serapeum to the celestial mathematics of the Great Pyramid. We've examined 25 separate enigmas from the Dendera Light and the Baghdad Battery to the Schist Disk and the Sphinx's water erosion, from the palimpsest helicopter hieroglyphs and the Giza power plant theory to the Tully papyrus and the submerged labyrinth of Hawara. Each one on its own is a fascinating head-scratcher, but when you step back and view them as a cohesive collection, a startling pattern begins to emerge. This isn't a scattering of random oddities. This is a constellation of anomalies, a chorus of voices from the past all whispering the same unsettling message. our timeline is wrong. These artifacts and structures, in their perfect symmetry, their inexplicable material science, and their anachronistic design, collectively challenge the comforting, linear narrative we've constructed for human history. They suggest that the story of technology is not a simple, upward-sloping line from primitive to advanced. It may instead be a cycle, with peaks and valleys, with ages of discovery followed by epochs of forgetting. The greatness of pharaonic Egypt, in this light, may not represent the dawn of civilization, but the magnificent, fading echo of a much older and far more sophisticated predecessor, a civilization whose name and true nature are now utterly lost to us. Think of the evidence we've seen not as isolated puzzles, but as interconnected clues in a grand, historical mystery. The stone-working technology implied by the vases of Djoser and the sarcophagi of the Serapeum finds a bizarre parallel in the modern mystery of Coral Castle. The potential for electrochemical knowledge hinted at by the Baghdad Battery resonates with the flawless metallurgy of certain royal artifacts. The astronomical and geodetic precision of the Great Pyramid's placement speaks to a global understanding of our planet that seems to belong to a later age. These threads, when woven together, do not form the picture of a culture taking its first, tentative steps. They depict a society, or perhaps a lineage of societies, that had already reached a zenith of scientific and technical prowess, the full extent of which we are only now, with our own advanced instruments, beginning to dimly perceive. The most profound implication is not that the ancient Egyptians had help from aliens or Atlanteans, but that they were the inheritors of a human genius that flourished in a forgotten epoch, a legacy they preserved, built upon, and in some cases may have even struggled to fully comprehend themselves. This realization transforms the entire landscape of ancient history from a static exhibit into a dynamic, unsolved case file. The sands of Egypt are not merely a resting place for dead kings. They are the world's largest and most tantalizing crime scene, where the evidence left behind points to a history far richer and more complex than our textbooks dare to admit. Every one of these 25 finds is a piece of evidence that doesn't fit the official story, a clue that the past holds secrets we are only beginning to unravel. And if these are the clues we have already found, what breathtaking truths still lie buried, waiting for the right shovel, the right satellite, or the right curious mind to bring them to light? What other game-changing technologies, what other records of lost civilizations, what other chapters in the human story are still hidden, not in some remote, inaccessible location, but right beneath our feet, concealed by the very deserts we thought we had thoroughly explored? The search is far from over. In fact, with every answered question, a dozen new mysteries emerge. The discovery of the big void inside the Great Pyramid didn't solve anything. It simply presented us with a new, locked door. The geophysical scans at Hawara confirmed the labyrinth's existence, but left us with the agonizing challenge of how to excavate it. The ongoing genetic studies of the royal mummies raise more questions about ancient migrations than they answer. This is the exhilarating frontier of ancient mysteries. It is alive, it is evolving, and it invites all of us to participate. So now, we turn the investigation over to you. What was the most mind-bending discovery on our list that reshaped your view of the ancient world? Do you have a favorite ancient mystery from Egypt or another part of the globe that keeps you up at night, pondering the possibilities? Share your thoughts, your theories, and your own personal enigmas in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation and explore these incredible puzzles together. And if you're hungry for more journeys to the edges of history, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because our exploration of the world's greatest unsolved mysteries has only just begun.